13.01, jeb 3.01. Mēs sāksim apmēram pēc 1 vai 2 minūtēm, gan ar mūsu ievadu prezentāciju, gan ar sarunas priekšmetu, gan ar prezentācijām, kas būs no ārvalstu pilsētām 3:15. Bet patreiz vēl minūtīti, 2, kamēr mēs gaidām, ka mūs pievienojās. Es skatos, ka mūs pievienojas 5-7 cilvēki minūtē, tā kā mēs pagaidīsim vēl mazliet pāris minūtes un tad sāksim. Tā kā droši esam visi jau 65 vairāk cilvēki, burtiski sāksim pēc minūtes.
Olesja, vai tu varētu lūdzu apstīties, vai slaido ir aktivizēts tas jautājums, jo piekļūt var, bet vēl nerādās aktīvs jautājums?
Jā, tūlīt noskaidrošu. Jā, vajadzētu būt, ka ir aktivizēts.
Paldies, jā, tagad ir.
Tā, kolēģi, vēlreiz prieks jūs redzēt. Mani sauc Viesturs Celmiņš. Es esmu šī webināra moderators, un mēs sākam mūsu sanāksmi. Es skatos, ka mums ir pievienojušies gan arī 20 cilvēku minūtes laikā. To es saprotu, tas ir temps, ar ko mēs esam priecīgi mūs visus apsveikt. Ja, mūsu šodienas saruna ir bagātīgi apmeklēta. Dažas lietas, ar ko mēs sāksim, tie, kas patreiz pakāpeniski pievienojās, drošības pēc jūs redzējāt, ka šīs saruna tiek ierakstīta, ja, līdzīgi kā gandrīz visas sarunas mūsdienās tiek ierakstītas kvalitātes nodrošināšanas ekspertīzē, bet vēl būtiskāk, lai mēs varētu saprast, kādas ir mūsu atsauksmes, kādas ir labās prakses un pieredze, un tā skaitā komentāri no jūsu puses. Tā kā drošības pēc to es piesaku, kad mūsu sanāksme tiek ierakstīta, protams, visi dati tiek anonimizēti. Numur 2, jūs redzat patreiz uz ekrāna slaido uzaicinājumu piedalīties mūsu viedokļu apmaiņā ar sekojušo jautājumu. Aicinam jūs atbildēt jautājumu, ar ko jums saistās ZEZ, jeb zemes emisijas zona. Ja jums ir mobilais tālrunis, jūs varat izmantot jūsu kameru, ja ne, tad nospiediet slaido.com un ierakstiet iekšā kodu 4089917 uz jautājumu, kas tiek jautāts slaido, un arī, protams, pašu savu atbildi ierakstiet iekšā. Ja? Šis nav, tā teikt, iesildīšanās, jeb suvenīri jautājums. Mēs šo jautājumu ar pavisam skaidru mērķi, lai mēs saprastu, ar ko cilvēkam asociējās. Ar ko viņam saistās ZEZ kā plānošanas instruments, kā dzīves kvalitātes uzlabošanas instruments, un šeit mēs ceram iegūt pēc iespējas racionālāku priekšstatu par to, kad viņš saistās ar 1, 2, 3 virzienu. Un tā skaitā šodienas gaitā, kad mēs dzirdēsim par Eiropas ārvalstu pilsētu pieredzi, cerams, ka dienas beigās ap 4:45 vismaz daļa no mums būs ieguvusi plašāku perspektīvu, redzējumu par to, kas ir zemes emisijas zonas, kādēļ viņu skaits Eiropā aktīvi pieaug, kā viņas tiek izmantotas, kādi izaicinājumi mums ir ceļā, lai viņus ieviestu, kādas lietas mums būtu jāņem vērā, lai Rīgā šis process iet uz priekšu raiti, efektīvi, racionāli un vēlreiz paturot iedzīvotāju un iesaistīto pušu intereses. Tā kā vēlreiz aicinam jūs aktīvi izmantot šo slaido funkciju, kas jums ir patreiz acis priekšā, vai nu slaido.com, vai izmantojiet jūsu telefonu ar kameru, ja viņš aizvedīs uz pašu platformu, ierakstam iekšā 4089917. Tā kā tas ir tāds kā aicinājums izmantot šo mazo aptauju, lai mēs redzam, kur mēs atrodamies, kur mēs esam attiecībā uz izpratni par to, kas ir zemes emisijas zona, kas ir šis pa zvēru, kāds nolūks viņam ir un kāds priekšstats mums par šo tēmu ir. Nu, lūk. Tātad tas ir 2 galvenie apsvērumi. Viens par jautājumu, kur mēs gribētu dzirdēt, ko mēs arī pēc sarunas beigām no jums pajautāsim apmēram 4:45. Vēlreiz, tiem, kas no mums ir pievienojušies, un skatos, ka mums ir pievienojušies vēl 15 cilvēki burtiski pēdējās minūtes laikā, šis ir vebinārs par ārvalstu pieredzi zemo emisiju zonu ieviešanā. Mums šodien būs stāsts no Kauņas, no Polijas, tā skaitā Varšavas, mums būs stāsts no Ģentes, Beļģijā, kā arī Oslo. Tātad pietiekoši plaša geogrāfija, gan mūsu kaimiņu valsts, gan mazliet tālāk Eiropas vidienē, gan arī Skandināvija un Benelux. Ja, tātad dažādas pieredzes par to, kā ir gājis citām pilsētām, lai mēs mācāmies no labāko pieredzes, tā skaitā iespējams kļūdām. Tāpēc mūsu saruna būs, es teikšu, 3 daļās. Mums būs īsts ievads, ko arī kolēģi no Rīgas domas Andžejs pēc brīža ieskicēs. Tad mums apmēram 15 minūtes pār 3 būs 4 prezentācijas no ārvalstu ekspertiem. Katra prezentācija apmēram 15 minūšu gaitā. Lūdzu paturam prātā, ka šīs prezentācijas būs angļu valodā. Tādēļ, ja kādam no jums būtu nepieciešams sinhronais tulkojums, tad jūsu MS Teams rīkjoslā, ja gadījumā vēl nav pazīstams, spiežam zem 3 punktiņiem, kas saucās vairāk, izvēlamies valodu vai saruna un nospiežam latviešu valodu, lai tur jums parādās kanāls, kuros notiekās sinhronā tulkošana ar prezentācijām. Ja, tā kā tas ir aicinājums tiem, kas gribētu dzirdēt tulkojumu sinhrono prezentācijām, kas būs angļu valodā, protams, no Kaunas, Oslo, Ģentes un Polijas. Ja, tā kā to mēs varam izmantot savus austiņas vai kā jums arī ārtāk. Tā kā tas ir par tehnisko pusi, un vēlreiz, ja kādi jautājumi, droši rakstat komentāros, kolēģi palīdzēs jums noinstruēt, kā šo kanālu atrast vēlreiz. Ja? Droši pēc rīkjoslā paskatīmies zem punktiņa vairāk, nospiežam, un tur apakšā ir valoda runa, kur nozīmēs kanālu, kas mums būtu nepieciešams. Tā kā to ir vēl laiks izdarīt. Vēlreiz prieks jūs visi redzēt, mums jau sarunā ir 95 cilvēki, tā kā teiktu, šeit ir vesela gandrīz ziedoņa zāle pilna, runājot tautas vārdiem, par ko liels prieks, ja mums tikko pievienojaties. Atgādinājums, šis ir vebinārs par zemes emisiju zonas ieviešanu, ārvalstu prakse, ko mēs tiekamies šodien dzirdēt, klausīties, domāt un diskutēt. Un būtiski mūsu šī saruna turpināsies vismaz ar daļu no jums, gan no sabiedrības, gan arī institūcijām. 4. decembrī kādam ir izslēgta kamera, lūdzu izslēdzam ārā, Gads Pucīts izslēdz ārā kameru un atvainojos, un arī mikrofonu, lai mēs varam visi koncentrēties. Vienāds, pat 4. decembrī mēs tiekamies jau Kopredz darbnīcā, kur mēs koncentrēsimies uz zemes emisijas zonas tēmas iztirzāšanu detālāk jau. Tā kā tas ir pēc 3 nedēļām 4. decembris. Vismaz daļa no jums tiek aicināti, protams, ne visi, kas esam šodien šeit, bet daļa no jums tiksimies arī 4. decembrī, kurā mums būs Kopredz pasākums par zemes emisiju zonas tematikas attīstību. Un tādēļ, atkārtoju vēlreiz tiem, kas pievienojas mums patreiz, jūs patreiz acu priekšā redzat saiti uz slido.com, kurā mēs aicinām jums kā dalībniekiem izteikt savu viedokli par to, ar ko jums taistās zemes emisijas zona, jeb kopsavilkumā ZEZ. Kādas asociācijas jums nāk prātā no šī vārda, raksta viņas droši iekšā, ja, un pēc tam skatīsimies, kā mums ir gājis, ar ko mums šīs abreviācija saistās. Un, protams, domāsim tālāk par to, vai mūsu sarunas laikā ar ekspertiem mēs esam iegūši lielāku priekšstatu par to, kā šis telpiskais plānošanas instruments darbojas dzīvē un ko mēs varam cerēt no viņa iegūt. Nu, lūk, mums ir arī 100 cilvēku sarunā, ļoti labi. Vēlreiz atgādinu visiem, mūsu saruna ir 2 daļās. Mums ir īsa prezentācija no Rīgas pārstāvjiem, kam es došu vārdu Andžejam pēc 30 sekundēm. Tad mums 3:15 sekos 4 prezentācijas, tātad Ģente, Beļģija, Oslo, Norvēģija, Varšava un Polija, kā arī tepat Kauņa, kuru šo plānošanas instrumentu jau ir ieviesus, un mēs dzirdēsim, kā viņam ir gājis. Apmēram 15 pār 4 mēs uzsāksim tādu kā vebināru forma paneļdiskusiju par to, kāda ir labā praksa, kas mums ir no šīm pilsētām pārņemama, kurā mums pievienosies arī Andžejs Stepančuks no Rīgas. Tad, ko mēs ar šiem plānošanas instrumentiem varētu darīt Rīgā, mācīties no labākajām iespējām un izdarīties no kļūdām. Un visbeidzot, arī aicināsim jūs, protams, uzdot jautājumus ap 4:40 par to, kā šis process iet uz priekšu arī Rīgā. Tā kā vēlreiz droši izmantam slaido, rakstam savus jautājumus, rakstam viņus pēc iespējas īsākus. Būs iespēja, protams, arī rakstīt čata režīmā, jeb televizīcijas režīmā, šeit pat MS Teams, vai arī paceļam roku, ja kādam ir dūša, slēgt iekšā kameru un ieslēgt mikrofonu. Tā kā vēlreiz, mans vārds Viesturs Celmiņš, es būšu jūsu šīs dienas webināru moderators, un mēs sāksim burtiski pēc 5 minūtēm mūsu paneli, atvainojos prezentācijas, kas būs no ārvalstu pilsētām angļu valodā. Tā kā vēlreiz visiem tiem, kuram nepieciešams tulkojums, izmantojam rīkjoslu, nospiežam vairāk valoda un runu, izvēlamies kanālu Latvijas audio, lai būtu arī tulkojums. Tas no manas puses īsumā ir viss. Es došu vārdu Andžejam Stepančukam no Rīgas valsts pilsētas attīstības departamenta ar mazu ievadu kādēļ Rīga šo procesu par zemes emisiju zonas plānošanas instrumentu ir uzsākusi, kādi ir mērķi un ko mēs ceram no šodienas sarunas panākt. Andžej, vārds tev.
Paldies, Viestur, par ievadvārdiem. Sveiciens visiem klātesošajiem, gan kolēģiem, gan tiem, ar kuriem esam tikušies iepriekšējos pasākumos, gan tiem, ar kuriem mēs tiekamies pirmo reizi. Šoreiz nebūs prezentācija, tikai pavisam tāds mutisks, īs ziņojums par to, kāpēc Rīgas pilsēta arī, kā Viesturs minēja, ar šo jautājumu nodarbojas jau, varētu teikt, kopš 2021. gada. Es esmu Andžejs, pārstāvu pilsētas attīstības departamenta mobilitātes plānošanas pārvaldes komandu, kas ir tā, kas līdz šim ir koordinējusi šīs aktivitātes, kas ir saistītas ar zemu emisiju zonas ieviešanu. Un to mums uzdot nacionālā līmeņa ministra kabineta rīkojums par gaisa kvalitātes uzlabošanu, kur ir noteikts, ka Rīgai līdz 2027. gadam ir jāievieš zemu emisiju zona. Tādā ziņā tas formulējums rīkojumā ir samērā lakonisks, un tad mūsu komandas darbs miedarbībā ar sabiedrību, ar mūsu sadarbības partneriem, ar citiem departamentiem un kolēģiem ir to visu apaudzēt ar to, kā tieši tas varētu funkcionēt, kāds ir teritoriālais griezums šai zemu emisiju zonai, kas ir tās labākās lietas, ko mēs mācāmies un paņemam no ārzemju kolēģiem, tāpēc ļoti vērtīgi arī šāda tipa pasākumi, kur mēs varam mācīties un skatīties, kas ir strādājis un kas nav strādājis. Tādam atsvaidzināšanai tas mūsu redzējums, mūsu vīzija par zemu emisiju zonu, kā mēs to ilgtermiņā formulējam, ir satiksmes sistēmas pārkārtošana ar mērķi samazināt vides piesārņojumu. Ar vides piesārņojumu mēs šeit saprotam primāri gaisa kvalitāti, bet arī troksni mazākā mērā un sabiedrības pārvietošanās paradumu maiņas veicināšanu, lai uzlabotu sabiedrības veselību un radītu pievilcīgāku un kvalitīvāku pilsētvidi. Tātad tas pats būtiskākais sabiedrības veselība. Ar sabiedrību mēs saprotam gan Rīgas iedzīvotājus, viesus, visus. Un kā pakārtotais ir tas, kā mēs saredzam, ka ZEZ ir lielisks instruments kopā ar vēl dažādām papildinošajiem darbībām un instrumentiem, lai radītu vēl pievilcīgāku un kvalitīvāku pilsētvidi, kurā būtu patīkami uzturēties, kura būtu patīkami apmeklēt, kur būtu patīkami dzīvot, pārvākties uz dzīvi pilsētā. Lūk, tāpēc saredzam, ka zememisiju zona nav tikai tāds strikti transporta projekts, mobilitātes projekts, bet tam ir ļoti plaša sinerģija ar daudzām lietām, par kurām tur rūpi citu departamentu kolēģi, ministrijas, un mūsu sadarbības partneri arī no nevalstiskajām organizācijām. Lūk. No tādām vēl praktiskajām lietām šī gada aprīlī uzsākām sadarbību caur iepirkumu ar Ernst & Young Baltic kolēģiem, kas mums nodrošina ar papildus nepieciešamo tehnisko ekspertīzi, lai mēs varētu izstrādāt pēc iespējas labāku šo papildinošo materiālu, kas ir saistīts ar zemo emisiju zonu. Un nākotnē, lai būtu ja būtu kaut kas, ko es vēlētos, lai jūs atceraties par Rīgas emisiju zonu, ja kāds jums jautās pēc šī pasākuma, kad tad ievieš, vai jau decembrī ievieš, vai nākošā gada pavasarī, tad īsumā tā laika skala ir tāda, ka sākumā tiek izstrādāts ziņojums. Ziņojumā būs iekļauti vismaz 3 dažādi alternatīvi scenāriji. Kāds var būt stingrāks, kāds var būt maigāks attiecībā pret ierobežojumiem vai kaut kādiem elementiem, kā satiksme varētu tikt pārkārtot pilsētā. Vasarā šis piedāvājums, šie scenāriji tiek nesti netiešā nozīmē lēmējvarai, politiķiem, lai viņi tos izvērtē, izskata visus mūsu argumentus par labu vienam vai citam variantam, un labākajā gadījumā, tajā ideālajā scenārijā, viņi spēj ar vairākumu vienoties par kādu no šiem scenārijiem. Un tad nākošā gada rudenī cerams sāksies nākošais darba posms, kas ir rīcības plāni, kas būs politikas plānošanas dokuments, izstrāde tam vienam konkrētiem scenārijiem. Attiecīgi, uz visiem tiem jautājumiem, ko mēs visbiežāk saņemam, kādi tieši būs ierobežojumi, kurām eiro klasēm, vai būs vai nebūs kāda nodeva, piemēram, kāda būs atvieglojumi, kas ar deklarētiem iedzīvotājiem, kas ar uzņēmumiem. Tas viss ir jautājumi, kurus mēs šobrīd pārceļam uz nākošā gada rudeni, kad mēs sāksim strādāt pie rīcības plāna, lai ieviestu to vienu pašvaldības atbalstīto scenāriju, kā mēs uz to ejam. Un tas laika rāmis, tas noslēdzošais laika atskaites punkts ir 2027. gads atbilstoši ministra kabineta rīkojumu, līdz kuram Rīgas valstspilsētai ir jāievieš zemo emisiju zona. Tas pavisam īsi no manis novēl mums lielisku pieredzes apmaiņu ar ārzemju kolēģiem un paņemam no viņiem to labāko, kas ir izdevies, un mācāmies arī no viņu kļūdām, ja viņi par tādām šodien pastāstīs. Lielas paldies! Viestur, nodod atpakaļ tev mikrofonu.
Paldies, Andžej, gan par mērķiem, kādu zemes emisijas zonam, kā plānošanas instrumentam ir. Jā, tad šis ir produkts, ar kuru starpniecību mēs plānojam uzlabot un veidot konkurētspējīgāku, pievilcīgāku dzīvesvidi. Jā, un vēlreiz šī nav lieta, ko mēs esam izgudrojuši. Šādas zonas Eiropā ir simtiem, Itālijā vien ir vairāk nekā 100, jā, un mēs esam pieraduši, ka pilsētās, kuras mēs mīlam apmeklēt, kā viesi, kā turisti, tā ir normāla parādība. Jā. Līdz mēs domājam, ka Rīgā šās instruments būtu ieviešams, un kādā veidā mēs to izdarīsim, ir visu mūsu kopīgais uzdevums gan institūcijām, gan iedzīvotājiem, gan uzņēmējiem, lai šis būtu veiksmīgs, jā, un visiem produktīvs un parocīgs veids, kā uzlabot pilsētvidi. Tad vēlreiz, ja kāds no mums ir pievienojies pakāpeniski, drošīs pēc šis ir vebinārs par labu ārvalstu praksi, kas ir zemes emisijas zonu instrumentu ieviešanā. Mums būs Kaunas, Polijas, Oslo, kā arī Benelux ģentes stāsts, kas sāksies būtiski pēc minūtes. Pirms mēs pārējiem pie ārvalstu prezentācijām, drošīs pēc, kas vēlreiz būs angļu valodā, tulkojums ir pieejams jūsu rīkļoslā zem 3 punktiņiem apakšā, kas ir vairāk, ja mums ir latviešu, jeb more, ja mums gadījumā rīklos ir angļu valodā, nospiežam tur, un tur jums būs valoda un runa, izvēlamies kanālu, kurā prezentācijas jums sinhronā tulkojumu tiks nodrošināts latviešu valodā. Tāpēc vēlreiz, jā, mūsu prezentācijas ir angliski, kā arī panelis būs angļu valodā, būtiski pēc minūtes. Un pirms mēs to sākam, vismaz daļai no jums mēs bijām lūguši atvērt slaido platformu, kurā ierakstīt atbildes jautājumu, ar ko jums asociējās ZEZ. Mums liekas, šis ir tā teikt ne tikai suvenīru vingrinājums, bet arī veids, kā mēs norentējamies, ar ko mums šis plānošanas instruments asociējās, lai tas ļauj mums saprast, kur mēs atrodamies, jā, nofiksēt tāds kā mazs audits, un redzēsim, vai mūsu sarunas beigās pirms 5 būs labāk izpratne uzgaisus. Tā kā kolēģiem no Ernst & Young lūgums uzlikt mums vārdu mākoni uz ekrāna, kādas ir mūsu atbildes, kādas mums ir asociācijas ar zemes emisijas zonu, kā plānošanas instrumentu. Tā skatos, vai mēs varam padalīties ar vārdu mākoni. Tā, redzu ļoti labi. Jā, tad mums bija jautājums, ar ko tev saistās ZEZ. Nu, lūk, ļoti, man liekas, interesanti. Nav tā, ka mēs visi runājam vienā valodā. Piesārņojums teritorijas ierobežojumi, zona, emisijas pilsētā, jā, tīrāks gaiss, mikromobilitāte, gaisa kvalitāte. Nu, redzam, visi jānēc, ka vismaz, es redzu vismaz, nu, es teikšu, kādi 15, 20, 30 mums te vārdu mākonis ir. Jā, cerams, ka mums šis priekšstats nokristalizēsies vismaz mazliet šodienas gaitā, dzirdot ārvalstu pieredzi, kā arī vēlreiz atgādinam, ko Andžejs jau pieminēja, tiekamies ar jums 4. decembrī, mēs daļa no jums jau kopstrādes, nevairs vebinārā, bet klātienes pasākumā, kurā darba grupās veidosim versiju par to, kādam ZEZ-am būtu jāizskatās, kā mēs viņu kopīgiem spēkiem padaram par dzīvotspējīgu instrumentu dzīves kvalitātes uzlabošanai, jā, efektīvu, labu sabiedroto mūsu attīstībai. Jā, un tas skaitā arī izcināsim, cerams, stereotipus un aizspriedumus par to, kā šis instruments darbojās. Nu, pulkstenis ir 19 minūtes pār 3. Mēs tagad pārējam uz mūsu sarunu angļu valodā, tā kā drošības pēc visiem, kas pievienojās, pieslēdzam tiem, kuriem vajag tulkojumu sinhronu no angļu uz latviešu valodu, un mēs aicināsim mūsu panelistus, kas mums šodien ir 4, tātad vēlreiz Oslo, ģente, Kauņa, kā arī Polija, precīzāk Varšava, būs mūsu šodien sarunas vadītāji. Kā pirmie mums būs Oslo, tāpēc es šajā brīdī pārslēdzu uz angļu valodu. Markus, it's 20 minutes past 3 in Riga, which I think should be 2:20 back in Oslo. We'll be happy to start with your presentation. So Markus, are you with us? We'd be happy to hear your experience.
I'm here. Thanks.
Fantastic, Markus. So I'm going to shortly introduce Markus. Markus is a project lead at Norwegian EV Association, and he'll be shortly describing the way how EVs have played a substantial role in rollout of low emission zones in Norway, including Oslo. and how the private sector and association has been crucial in this conversation and has facilitated the conversation. But again, Marcus, I'm not going to steal your thunder. You know your ground, and you're going to cover that in a second. So please, again, fantastic. You're sharing your screen already. 15 minutes to go. Marcus, let's hear from Norway in Oslo. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for having me today. It's truly an honor to not exactly be in Riga, but be with you in Riga. And it's only 1.5 years since I was here in Riga last time. I was visiting the town hall and a lot of the people working for the city, and also some of the people running the city. So it's good to be back. I'm not sure if any one of you are here today, but it's at least good to be back. And thanks so much for the good welcome last time and this time. My name is Marcus. I work as a project lead in the Norwegian EV Association. I have been working in the association since 2018. And the last couple of years I've been working mostly internationally, sharing different experiences from Norway when it comes to the EV transition. And I'm coming back to that a little bit. But I'm based here in Oslo and work with different partners all around the world. So it's truly an honor to also be with you guys in Riga. My task today is to try to talk about our way of doing LECs in Norway, and we haven't constructed LECs per se, but we have used the toll ring systems around the big cities of Norway to ensure to use those measures to increase the EV adoption in the cities. And I'm going to talk a bit about how we did it, and also not least the effects of using the toll rings as in practical low emission zone. First, a little bit about our organization. The Norwegian EV Association is a member-based organization of individual EV drivers. So all our members are private EV drivers, and we have around 120,000 members today, making us the largest EV driver association in the world. And in the office back here in Oslo, we have around 55 employees working both to serve the EV drivers and every needs like a consumer organization, but also working with advocacy and taking part in the conversation about policies in Norway, both on national level, but also on local level with city administrations. And now also the last couple of years, we have been working more and more internationally because we see that the Norwegian situation, we have a lot of experiences and some things that we've done right and some things we have done the wrong way. And we think it's important to share these experiences for all the markets that's going to grow their EV adaptation. Norway at a glance, just when it comes to EVs. And when we talk about EVs, we talk about battery electric vehicles. And at the moment, we have a penetration of 88% of all new cars sold in Norway is battery electric vehicles. That means that almost 9 out of 10 who buys a new car in Norway buys a battery electric vehicle. And you can see on this graph that this has been a growing and a steady increase of this market share since around 2010 when it really started to kick off. With 2011, 2012 was kind of the first years when we got the Nissan Leafs and the early Teslas that made people start switching. This also means that only 1 out of 10 buys a fossil-driven car, and most of these 12% who buys an internal combustion engine car are now buying either plug-in hybrids or pure gasoline cars. But it's a steady decrease on the fossil-driven cars. The target that the Norwegian Parliament set already in 2017 was that within 2025, we're only going to sell battery electric vehicles when it comes to the new car sales. So that means that we have only about 2 months left to reach 100%. We are closing in, and we think that it's still possible to make it. The challenge now is actually for the smallest segment of cars. Still, Toyota Yaris and some of these small gasoline cars are somewhat popular, not very, but still are kind of hindering us from reaching that 100%. So we need to do some more policies on that. But all in all, we are approaching 100% battery electric sales, and this is because of a lot of things. As the Norwegian EV Association, we do every year a survey amongst EV drivers in our country. In general, we get around 15,000 respondents every year, and we ask them all sorts of questions. One of the most important questions we ask is, which of these 4 were the most important to you in your decision to start driving an EV? And a very, very clear majority answers it's because of economy. So for us, it's not about having a population more environmentally interested or more technological savvy or anything like that to make this transition happen. It's basically because we have managed to get the economy, like the costs for having an EV, for buying an EV, at the same price or lower as internal combustion engine. So when the consumer chooses between an internal combustion engine and a battery electric vehicle, they choose based out of their pockets. And then we think that we kind of say that it's the economy that makes people switch to an EV, and it's the experience that makes them stay. And to ensure that you get enough people switch to an EV, you need different policies to ensure that economy is on the EV side of things. In Norway, we have a lot of different policies on taxes, on purchase taxes and exemption from VAT, etc. So we have a lot of policies that decrease the purchase prices for EVs and also increased the purchase prices for internal combustion engines. We have discounts in toll rings, which I'm going to talk about. We have discounts and somewhere free parking, and we have access to bus lanes for EVs. And we're also working on lowering the charging costs as much as possible. These things are things that make people switch to an EV. But you also need policies to ensure that people get the good experience when they start driving an EV. And then we're talking not about purchase prices, because that's already done, but we need to have lower running costs. Also, toll-ring discounts can be a good thing when it comes to the experience, making them stay. And when that's also the same for parking and bus lanes, and not necessarily the charging costs, but how user-friendly charging is a very important thing for the consumers when they are deciding to stay with their EV or not. This means that we have kind of 2 things here that both makes people switch to an EV and that it makes people stay with their EV when they have bought one. And one of them are toll rings. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, because this webinar is about low emission zones. And we want to talk about how the toll discounts accelerated the transition to EVs and actually works as low emission zones in the cities of Norway. In Norway, most of the bigger highways and transport corridors between these big cities are toll roads. In addition, most of the bigger urban areas have toll rings surrounding the city centers. Toll income in Norway are in general used to cover road construction, but the income from toll rings around the city are in addition used to get income to investment in public infrastructure, as well as a means to regulate the amount of cars on the roads in these urban areas. And in 2021, we realized something very interesting. These 10 municipalities were the top 10 municipalities in Norway when it comes to the share of EVs on the total amount of personal vehicles in their municipalities. they are way above the Norwegian national average. The last column here where it says Norge, I forgot to translate that to English, but Norge means Norway. So the last column, where you see around 15% is the Norwegian average when it comes to share of EVs of the total amount of personal vehicles on the roads. But these 10 municipalities before are the top 10. And you can see one of them are already in 2021, were around 35% of all the cars in that municipality were battery electric. So we try to understand something. What is the common denominator for these 10 municipalities? Askøy, the first one, is outside the toll ring between Askøy and Bergen, the second biggest city in Norway. So Askøy was outside and had a toll ring, and it was a very expensive toll ring because it was connected to a very big bridge connecting Askøy, which is an island, to Bergen. And then we look at Bergen, of course, having a big toll ring system with 2 or 3 different toll rings from the city center and the mid-center, and then the outskirts of the city had toll rings. So all the inhabitants of Bergen very affected by the toll rings. Then we skip Austevoll and we go to Bærum, outside Oslo, also outside the toll ring connecting them with Oslo, so very affected. Oslo obviously having 3 toll rings from the city center to the outskirts and one in the middle. Lørenskog, one of the municipalities outside Oslo, the same as goes for Nordre Follo, and then Malvik outside the 3rd biggest city in Norway called Trondheim, also with a toll ring between them and the city. Øygarden outside Bergen, toll ring between them and Bergen. Randaberg outside the 4th biggest city, Stavanger in Norway, also with a toll road between. And then I skipped Austevoll because Austevoll is an island with a ferry connection to Bergen, the 2nd biggest city, and the ferry connection also has a discount for EVs when they travel with it. So the common thing about all of these 10 municipalities is that they have a toll ring either outside or inside their municipality and between them and one of the bigger, more important job markets, for example. So we saw that the toll ring municipalities are the ones who are adopting EVs fastest. We looked at it in another way. We took every municipality either with a toll ring or outside the toll ring affected by the toll ring system. Yes?
Marcus, sorry, just to say, you have 3 to 4 minutes to wrap up.
Okay.
So 15 minutes in total. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Then we'll just skip that one and just saying that the toll ring policy in Norway has been, from 1997, it was 100% discount for EVs passing the toll rings. And from 2018, they increased it to that you have to pay 50% when you have an EV passing the toll rings in Norway. And then now you have to pay 70%. You have a 30% discount. But this is the national law, and the municipalities can decide within this rate. So Oslo, for example, still has a 50% discount instead of 30% discount. But some of them are now going more closely to 30%. I just want to then get to the main point here, that we asked the Norwegian EV drivers in 2022, why did this? Would you have bought an EV without? And then a lot of different answers. And the most important thing is to see if you would bought an EV without the discount in the toll ring. Nationally, 17% answers no, we wouldn't bought an EV without the toll ring. And what we did then is to trying to figure out the EV sales of Oslo, Stavanger, Bergen, Trondheim, the big urban areas in Norway. And if we would, and then we looked at the answers for would you buy an EV without the toll ring discount? Then we saw that that number was even higher, like around 20%. So if we take away 20% of the EV sales in these areas. If we would say that without the discount, we would have 20% lower sales in these areas. We would have a sale on around 50% for most of these areas at that moment, taking us almost 2 years back. So the toll ring in itself and the discount with the toll ring moved us 2 years ahead with the EV sales. And now, since we had, I thought we had 20 minutes, sorry about that. I'll try to just explain one example on what we saw, because we started to look at two of the most important cities in Norway, biggest cities in Norway, Kristiansand and Stavanger. Stavanger had a toll ring with a discount, and Kristiansand did not have a toll ring, did also have a toll ring with a discount. And then when Stavanger, the gray one here, they introduced a 50% payment for EVs in the third quarter of 2019. And what we could see there is that in this period of time, from the first quarter of 2019 to 2020 first quarter, the year around when they implemented the fee for EVs, only 50% payment, the EV sales went quite heavily down. At the same time, for Kristiansand, when you see the dark blue line, they didn't introduce any EV payment, and the EV development went up as normal. The other side of Stavanger also introduced the toll ring when we came to 2020. They introduced the payment for EVs in 2020. That decision was made already in 2019, and you see that after the decision was made in 2019, the light blue, which is Stavanger, decreased their EV sales over the years at the same time as Kristiansand, which still had 100% EV discount, increased their EV sales. So what we see with these numbers, and a lot of others I was supposed to show, is that the consumers are really responding to having a discount for EVs when it comes to entering the city. Norway didn't implement low emission zones because it was difficult to have that concerning national laws about restricting areas for some and some. But it was possible to differentiate the fares in the toll rings between internal combustion engines and battery electric engines. And then you had the opportunity to reduce the emissions in the city center only by adjusting the price between the internal combustion engines and the battery electric vehicles. And then as the EV sales increased, of course, there were more and more cars driving with a big discount in the cities, which meant that the city lost a lot of revenue. Then they could increase the total, the normal fare, because we had the percentage rule. So if the EVs paid 50%, then you just increase the normal share for internal combustion engines, and you would also increase the EV share at the same time, making it more expensive for both, but keeping the relative advantage on the same space. So sorry about not going through all the stats, but I would love to take part in the discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Markus. We'll catch up with some of the issues and main takeaways from this journey. Thanks so much in the panel section. We'll be moving on to the next presentation, and that's going to be Mark on experience from Ghent. We had initially planned Arne from Ghent to do this, but he was not able to make it. So we have Mark Geldof from Alps Architects stepping in. Again, fantastic speaker and fantastic substitute for Arne, which we'll be able to hear at 5 when Arne opens up for the comment section. So, Mark, would be happy to see you. Please share the screen, share the presentation. You have 15 minutes for your presentation. And yes, after Mark, we're going to have Martinez from Kaunas, and then we're going to have Alexander as a last one to follow up to make sure that Martinez can share the experience from Kaunas. So again, make sure that Martinez is going to be going after Mark's presentation, and we're going to finalize with Alexander from Poland. So now Mark with Ghent, then followed up by Martinez from Kaunas and Alexander from Poland. So Mark, please share the screen. We can see the screen. The floor is yours. 15 minutes. Let us go.
You see the screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. So I'm speaking now in the person of Arne Baart, who is the LES coach in Ghent. He could not be here on this time, but he will be available later for discussion, so that you can ask questions to him. I will shortly introduce this less emission zone in Ghent, which started in 2020. There are 3 points that I will go or focus on the preparation. The results would be something that you could discuss with Arne, as well as the feedback. So preparation, the low emission zone has been seen as part of a general vision. In fact, in Ghent, they have also already introduced a traffic circulation plan. Secondly, they had a modal shift in their mind, in the sense that they would stimulate, by the circulation plan, stimulate biking, but also using public transport. Then thirdly, low emission zone, which is in fact complementary to this previous strategies. And finally, e-share mobility, so sharing as much as possible energy low mobility issues like cars, but also the steps and things like that, or velos, electric velos, for instance, which are available in the city. So all by all, this should increase the livability of the city and would improve the perception of the nuisance, the hindrance, and decrease the social costs and the negative health effects. In this slide, you see very shortly the relation between the different Euro norms from 1 till 6D and the emissions, which you see the soot, especially from the diesel cars, coming from 65 milligram per kilometer in the Euro 1 and going down to when we come to the Euro 5, for instance, we are 0.55 and Euro 6 even, and Euro 6D even lower. So interesting is also a few words about preparation, which took about 4 years. They started in 2016. An important aspect is, of course, the project coordination. How do we start? How do we approach this? Then the legal and policy-wise processes that had to be researched in the beginning and had to be processed. Finally, also very important, I will come back to that more in detail, the communication with the inhabitants. Then the technical stuff, the ICT development, also the ANPR, which are the cameras who are on the road, on the street, who are identifying the numbers of the cars, so the plate signals. And then, of course, inside an organization or reorganization of the administration, because you need a lot of data when you have a identified a plate, then you have a lot of data to look for. And we also have, of course, foreign visitors. So this makes a lot of additional administrations. There have been to do some changes in public space as well. And then finally, we have the monitoring and the start and follow up and some flanking policies. These flanking policies are some smaller decisions, which have to do with supporting the main tasks. But I think that Arne can give more information about that. So here we see it on the right, we see the effective area that is under this less zone. It is, in fact, the center of the city, more or less, which is surrounded by a road ring. It's not a toll ring like in Oslo. It's just a road ring, the R40, but going completely around the city. And this was, of course, a good borderline to decide where we could introduce the less zone, as well as the traffic circulation plan, because the traffic circulation plan is working with directions going to available parking blocks, parking houses mostly, and trying to avoid that the traffic becomes transit. So there is, in fact, there is no transit traffic anymore in this part of the city. By deciding about this, there has been taken account of the density of people, the clearness and the simpleness for the user, the driver, the visitor, and so on. Then the possibility to keep the control over it by police, but also by these smart elements like cameras. Then the complementarity with mobility policy of Ghent, and finally also this possibility of having flanking measures. What today it is, we can see these three situations. So on the left, when you have a diesel car, Euronorm 5.6, or a benzene car, Euronorm 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then you still can come in the city, in the center, and in and out without paying anything. Then we come to in the middle to the diesel, which is already giving bad emissions, Euronorm 4, and this one, in fact, should be kept out of the city, but there is a possibility by paying that you come in and, for instance, for a certain period. For instance, for 1 week you pay 25 euros, for a month you pay 50, for 4 months under 30, and for a whole year you pay 345 euros. Maybe this is something to ask to Arne, because I suppose that they have certain reasons to introduce this. There is also a system in Ghent where, as an inhabitant, when you want to sell your old car, for instance, diesel norm 4, Euronorm 4 or less, then you get a certain amount of money. I think it's about 500, it's not much, about 500 euros. That's a special case for inhabitants. And then finally, the third case is when even diesel Euronorm 1 to 3 and benzene Euronorm 1, they are having much more emissions, so they can enter just for 1 day and only 5 times a year, and then they pay 35 euros a day. About communication, so as we said already, it started, the preparation started in 2016, and the communications was already starting in 2017. I think it's very important, this aspect, because people had to, especially the inhabitants, had to be informed. So this was in 2017. It was really a wake-up call. It's coming, and it will start in 2020. Then the next year there was a large communication and information to the different stakeholders, for instance, all kinds of organizations which are active in the city. and also, of course, people who have a business there, and so on. In 2019, the information campaign was set up, very specific to everybody, especially giving already the information about the rules and about the costs, which are what you have to pay if you want to come in when your car is already belonging to the high emissions. And finally, in 2020, then there was a very precise, direct information. For instance, inhabitants got a letter from the city, so that they could, and they also referred to the website because they have set up a website so everybody could, in fact, read everything on the website. A few illustrations to show that how via which publications the less was announced. Then these are parkings on the edge of the zone. So there you on the parking meters you already see that there is a low emission zone, so everybody can see it when they come to that kind of parking. And then here a more differentiated elements of information like the apps, paper information, even a booklet and the letter to the inhabitants. So that's it, Jesters.
Thank you, Mark. This is great. Less than 15 minutes. Fantastic. So we have room for a presentation. So again, for all the participants, we have 106 people in the webinar. This is just to say that the questions to the city of Ghent will be addressed at 5 p.m. when Arne Brent from city of Ghent will be joining us online. Where we can ask him questions, comments, and recommendations for Riga. So again, that'll be at 5. So we'll be moving on to the next presentation. And again, please reserve your questions, commentaries, or inquiries for the panel once we are moving to that. So if that is okay, I'll ask Martinas now to join with presentation from Kaunas, and then followed from Martinas, we'll have Alexander. Fantastic. Martinas is very, very fast, as we expect from our Lithuanian neighbors, fast and furious. Thank you. We can see the screen. Martinas, fantastic. The first logo of Kaunas. So the floor is yours, Martinas. 15 minutes is yours, and then we can also have some questions to you before we move to Alexander from Poland. Martinas, floor is yours.
Okay, hello. Today I would like to represent what we implemented in Kaunas. It's a low emission zone. At first, Kaunas is the second largest city in Lithuania. The population is around 300,000 citizens. City area is around 157 square kilometers. In 2019, the Kaunas Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan was approved, which includes the introduction of low-emission zones. The citizens were involved in the preparation of the Sustainable Mobility Plan through public events, like discussions, publicity of the results, meetings with the interested parties. In the first phase, the low-emission zone was deployed in Kaunas Old Town area. The main objective of the low-emission zone is to reduce car transit through the Old Town. Some vehicles use the low-emission zone to bypass the congestions in Birštonas and Gertrūdos streets, and opted to use the narrow streets of the Old Town. And the Birštonas and Gertrūdos streets you can see in the right of the low emission zone. Yes, and the second phase of low emission zone would include the new town area. The extension of the low emission zone is necessary to ensure the possibility of bypassing the central part of the city by installing the Kėdainiai bridge. It is presented by number 1 on the slide. Construction work on the Kėdainiai bridge is already in progress. The contract has been signed for 57 months, but we expect the work to take less time. Other infrastructure is also being managed to ensure fewer cars transit through the central part of the city. The plan is to extend the low emission zone after 5 years. In low emission zone was installed 21 license plate scanning cameras in 10 entrances of the low emission zone to detect vehicles entering and exiting the area. There are 21 information panels to inform drivers that they are entering the zone and how the system works. From the 1st of August, vehicles have to pay €2 fee for entering the low emission zone. The cost apply for transit rather than entering this zone. Those arriving on personal business will not pay the new fee because the first hour of parking is included in the low emission zone fee. Currently, a fee of €2 applies for parking 24/7. As per yesterday, Kaunas City Council approved new next slide, yes. Implementation challenges we have had. It's a cultural heritage area. The low emission zone territory falls within a cultural heritage zone, so all decisions require approval of the Department of Cultural Heritage, which made the process more time-consuming. Selection of the site, its evaluation of the existing infrastructure, the possibilities for its replacement, and the need for traffic management. Legislation. There is no roadside and the road traffic rules governing the low emission zone. In the absence of a sign, there is no legal regulation of what rules apply in the zone and what is the administrative liability for breaking the regulation rules. Changes to regulation will be applied next month. So we had to use existing legislation of local self-government, which lets municipalities to set the territory and rates of local tolls. Next challenge is convenient payment, customization of parking meters, adoption of mobile apps, resident of the design of a website structure. In order to set up successfully operate the low emission zone, specific data from other authorities was required. Register data. The company keeps the register of vehicles and the register of vehicle drivers of the Republic of Lithuania. We needed to update the agreements so that we could properly evaluate passing vehicles, electric, petrol, diesel. With the data we have, we can allow electric vehicles to pass without separate permits. There have been suggestions to differentiate according to emissions, but we do not yet have enough data on CO emissions from vehicles in Lithuania. Center of registers data to verify property owners and data from disability and capacity determination service under the Ministry of Social Security Labor. A few exclusions were foreseen and free access to the low emission zone was granted for property owners, formed lots with as many permits as parking spaces, not formed plots with one permit. For service transport, for special transport, people with disabilities, and for electric vehicles. Yes, as per yesterday, Kaunas City Council approved new exceptions, so taxis and food delivery can enter less for free. Although we have communicated continuously about the planned implementation of the low emission zone with permits starting on the 1st of July, most applications for permits were submitted in the last days of July, up to 400 applications per one day. It was time consuming because we had physically to check how many parking spaces are available on the plots. So not all permits were issued on time. A number of convenient payment options have been provided. Payment can be made at parking meters, currently available mobile apps like Car1 Unipark, web pages within 30 days. A limited number of permits are issued and individuals can administer the entry, change of number plates themselves. And for an annual permit to park a vehicle in the low emission zone for 365 days from the date of purchase of permit, 1,200 euros. We have faced several challenges in setting up the low emission zone. It was food delivery, taxi couriers, entering the territory for a short period of time, almost as a transit of the therefore subject to a fee. From yesterday, food deliveries and taxi supplies have exceptions. Educational establishments, there are 2 schools and 2 kindergartens in zones, so parents of younger children want to take their children directly to their school and therefore are subjected to a fee. Some residents have more than 1 vehicles, but get only 1 permit. So they have to park their other vehicles elsewhere. Employees want to drive to work and park close to the workplace, but don't get permission for their vehicles, therefore are subjected to a fee. And hotels. Parking lots are usually not big enough for customers and employee cars. To make low emission zone easier and more accessible, an additional infrastructure was installed. The low emission zone has been equipped with 15-minute free parking spaces and access to institutions 250 meters radius. A little bit statistics, it's around 2,000 cars used to enter the low emission zone. After the introduction of the fee, the number of cars decreased to 1,500. And the last slide is, although only 1% of vehicles in Kaunas are electric, we noticed that tax exceptions are an excellent initiative for less polluting transport. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Martinus. I know that you have to run for the next meeting. Is that correct?
Yes.
So let me. How much time do you have that for some questions that we might have from Riga here? Do you have 2 or 3 minutes?
Yeah, 2 minutes is still okay.
Great. Can we go back to one of your slides about the challenges from different members of society? I would like to address some of the questions there.
Okay.
So yeah, yes, I think that this was the one. Fantastic. So we have seven groups of I would say of members of society. Could you please explain a little bit how did you address these challenges? Were they, face-to-face meetings? Did you issue some special permits for them? Food deliveries, car sharing companies, couriers. How did you address these challenges before and after of deployment of low emission zone?
Yes, we were talking with all of these groups, and we were trying to make it easier them to pay low emission zones, but not trying to make free access. Yes, it was big issues because food deliverers, they mentioned that they making people more comfortable to get food to their home, or the businesses is just broken because food deliverers can't go for free. That exception was made yesterday, and they will be free of tax. They would, with car sharing companies, yes, we discussed a lot, but we saw that they were paying parking fee. So it's the same like to entering the low emission zone, because the parking fee is about €2. And we saw that they are parking cars about 1 hour when it is taken from another person. Couriers, yeah, we had discussions, but they were not new in this, because we have several other areas, other streets where can't vehicles enter, and they had to buy permits. So we just expanded the permit zone, and they just paying the same amount of money and get it to the low emission zone. Yes, and it was like in one slide shown, we just made 15-minute stops around the low emission zone, and the couriers, people, or parents taking children can place their car and just go 250 meters to the point. Yeah.
Okay. And what about residents and employees and hotels?
Residents, like I mentioned, residents had about, in Lithuania, we have about 2-3 cars in a family. So it was a problem that they have to pay for a second car. But we just trying to make them to form plots. So if they make that plots, they can use that plot and get that permission permits for all cars. With employees and hotels, like I mentioned, it was they don't have a lot spaces for parking. So they mentioned that it's not enough for customers. So what we tried and what they did, so the employees, hotel employees, just leaving out of the low emission zone. So hotel customers just have more space to leave the car. And employees, like residents, employees just want to have their parking places near the office. So it was discussions, and they have to leave it out of the low emission zone.
Okay, so out of these 7 groups, some do have free parking, such as residents, because they live there. The taxi sharing companies, they obviously use for an hour, and then they can move on. Couriers have residency permits where they can leave the cars and move. Okay, last but not least, so please remind us how long the low emission zone has been in operation in Kaunas. Is that a half year? Is that a year?
No, it's about 3.5 months. It was low emission zone cameras were installed about a year. So we took statistics, and we were communicating with the groups, target groups. And in August 1st, it was it's working from August the 1st.
Okay, and I understand from statistics that you used to have 2,000 cars per this area, and now you have a drop about 30% to 1,500 cars, right? So about the 500 car decrease.
Yes, it's a daily increase, decrease.
Okay, and is this something that you were anticipating? Is this something that you hoped for, or has this exceeded your expectations? So is this more or less or about the same as you were planning?
We are planning more, bigger decrease, because we see that about 20% don't pay low emission zone. They don't pay, or they don't know, or we don't know why they're not paying. So we think about 200 vehicles could be less, and it will be about how much percent? It will be bigger decrease.
Okay, and last but not last question. So will the low emission zone increase in size? Will you add new territories to existing geography? Will it become bigger in terms of Kaunas municipality?
Yeah, it will be much bigger, but we have to make a possibility for cars to have another ring how to reach a destination. So the bridge is. I'll show the second slide. It was not mentioned. The bridge is mentioned with the number 1. And when we will have a bridge, we will have a possibility cars to have chance not to go to the center of Kaunas.
Thank you, Martynas. And when will this extension of low emission zone happen? 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Do you have a plan in mind?
The bridges will be built in 3-4 years. So we think after 4 or 5 years we will have extended low emission zone.
Thank you. And last question promised from our side. How are the municipality and citizens living in Kaunas? Have they been positive? Have they been negative? What is the general mood in municipality of Kaunas about the project?
2 months were very difficult. Everyone had to live with the low emission zones. So now it's easier. And now we hear citizens from another places just asking when it will be extended, because they saw that there is less car, less pollution, and some people want extension of the lower emission zone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Martynas. We know that you have to run for another meeting. Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm sure we'll be meeting again because this presentation is very, very interesting, very, very concise and precise. So thank you so much. I'm sure that we'll be happy to hear from Kaunas again, perhaps a visit or so. So thank you, Martynas. Best of luck with this development, and we'll be sure to hear from you more. Thank you so much, Martynas.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you, Martynas. So our next presentation is Alexander Roch. So we have Poland in the house, so to say. Alexander, are you with us?
I am with you. Yes, hello. Yep.
Thank you, Alexander. So just after on the wide shoulders of the Lithuanians and Belgians and Norwegians, we'd be happy to hear what's been happening in Polish cities and a journey to clean air. Thank you, Alexander. The floor is yours. The screen is visible to us. We're happy to have you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, we decided to actually say a little more of the context because everybody focuses on what's going on in the single cities that really deploy low emission zones. I think the very important message before I actually get into some of the intricacies is to also really understand this is something that we should be planning as a strategy. So obviously Poland geographically is a little bigger than the markets that have been discussed. We also have a little more cities that are quite intense urban areas. And so it's very important to coordinate all the processes that are happening along the low emission zones and zero emission zones in the future. This is why we want to show this journey because it's very important to understand it. Now, we are an organization that has been at this process since the beginning. We're an organization that represents the industry, over 300 companies. We are very active. You see the numbers, lots of publications, lots of trainings, lots of stuff happening. But most importantly, we have over 100 institutional partners. This means also cities. We work with over 80 cities in Poland that are all focused around urban solutions that are related to zero emission transport and greening cities, which foundation of this process right now is low emission zones. Now, you can see in this slide, the most important thing is we go from the European level to the local level. And if you look at our content committees in the middle of the slide, we have what we call a local government committee. And this is where all these cities meet every month to discuss these processes. But how did that look since the beginning? Since 2018, we were talking about this process formally. So at the beginning of that year, we had an amendment, or actually the introduction of the law on electromobility and alternative fuels. Now, this law was based mostly on AFID back then and on the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. Of course, it had many other elements included, but it was the first act of law that actually mentioned electromobility, for example, hydrogen mobility, as something that is regulated. That is also important because those definitions later would provide which vehicles could enter a low emission, which couldn't, zone, which couldn't. Of course, there are some other exceptions, but this is why that is, amongst other reasons, important. Then we had the first low emission zone being implemented. So The law that I named actually introduced obligations for cities to install charging stations and equip their municipal fleets with electric vehicles. And those obligations were only met by one city, Kraków, exactly. And Kraków then also, carrying on that ambition, implemented the first low emission zone. Now, that was not a success. Why? Well, because there was very little communication done during that time. So it was great that Kraków took the initiative, but it was not so great because some of the inhabitants of the low emission zone woke up within that low emission zone, not knowing they're within its boundaries. So this is something that has to be omitted because it rose an enormous uproar of negative comments and backlash. And it led to a complete abandoning of the idea of low emission zones in Poland. We came back to the idea after COVID towards the fourth quarter of 2021, when we gathered 13 of the biggest cities in Poland to sign a declaration that they actually want to come back to the topic again and want to deploy low emission zones. We decided that it requires more of a comprehensive regulation, and we were working with the Ministry of Climate and Environment here in Poland and many other NGOs from the market. So it's not only our success, obviously, but we were leading this process along with the cities. And there was an amendment to the law on electromobility and alternative fuels. Now, this amendment actually was based on that declaration that we managed to draft up with the cities. And it actually started the whole process of communication and public discussion on the topic. Now, we had to amend this law a couple of more times. Krakow then started to talk about deploying a low emission zone again in 2022. I'm missing the zone here. And basically, they actually made a resolution of a local government body that is above the municipal level in Poland. So let's say the county level, but it wasn't enacted actually. So we were without a low emission zone until 2023 when Warsaw took up the mantle, and with another amendment, which led to the potential to actually control the access to low emission zones in Poland with digital tools and digital methods. Because before the amendment of July 2023, the regulatory tool to control the access was based on stickers. Now, we know from many cities, but I think closest to Poland, basically, we would say Berlin, that stickers don't really work that well. And we were informed about that by the municipal authorities of Berlin, who said, yeah, you know, I mean, this isn't very good to actually keep up the discipline, because it's very easy with human error to miss the vehicles that don't apply for the low emission zone. So we decided to bring in the digital methods. And after that, the process started accelerating. And as of July this year, we have a low emission zone in Warsaw. I will say a little bit about that low emission zone. I don't think it is the best benchmark low emission zone. I think it's a benchmark on how to achieve some success in deploying this low emission zone. However, there are downsides to it that I think sometimes and some elements might be ameliorated, and we'll be working towards that in the future. We're also planning to amend the Act on Electromobility Law and Alternative Fuels again, because we want to make the effort even more coordinated among cities. But then we have to understand that in Poland, it is becoming an even more regulatory issue that cities will have to deploy these low emission zones. And this is a solution similar to what's going on in Spain, basically actually binding cities legally to do this. So we put in our resilience and recovery plan that low emission zones have to be deployed for cities above 100,000 residents. There's quite some cities in Poland that have this. I will show a slide later that actually puts them on the list. Of course, we will have to have especially low emission zones deployed for cities that exceed NOxs. And this will be determined by a public authority. We call it GIOS, so the Chief Inspectorate for Environmental Protection. And basically, if that authority states that the levels are exceeded, then as of January 1st of the next calendar year, the city has to deploy a low emission zone. This is very important for the government on the national level, because otherwise the funds from the resilience and recovery plan have to be returned. So this is something that is really binding. But what are these levels? Well, the levels according to the World Health Organization that are actually also right now binding in Poland are 10 micrograms per cubic meter for NOxs, which are the most important in terms of these low emission zones regulations. The EU standards currently are 40 micrograms per cubic meter. This is also the CAFE level. Now we know that with the new AAQD and other regulation coming in, it'll be 20 micrograms per cubic meter by 2030 and onwards. So it's actually slashed in half against what we have today, but still this is pretty ambitious. But what are some of the things you have to think about before you actually start talking about low emissions? We didn't do that. And this is very important because 3 out of 10 cities that are the largest in Poland don't have monitoring stations that actually look at NOxs. And out of the cities above 100,000, you can see there are 37 of these cities in Poland in total. 21 don't have these kind of monitoring stations. So this means that you saw earlier, we are bound to deploy low emission zones in cities that exceed NOx levels, but we may not know which ones do. So this is very important that before you do these kinds of level dependent regulations and obligations, you think of all the potential factors before. And out of the ones we do have, and in what we've seen for the NOx obligations that were defined in the slides before, we see, of course, that 22 monitoring stations in Poland, and you see the cities that probably many of you recognize who have been to Poland exceed those levels. So this is indicative of how much we need these low emission zones. So just a couple of numbers, because I know there is a panel discussion after. And I know this is very important for you guys to have this information, and I can delve into the details. But the Warsaw, I don't have a slide for this. I'm going to be speaking from my mind. The Warsaw low emission zone was deployed, as I said, in mid of this year, so July of this year, and it will be increasingly more disciplined. So there are 6 phases of the deployment of the low emission zone. The first phase excludes Euro 2 for petrol and Euro 4 for diesel. So it's the 90s and 2005 for diesel. So that's very, very old vehicles that come into play. For the first 2 phases, the people who are registered as Warsaw dwellers and those who pay taxes in Warsaw will be excluded from all the regulations of the low emission zone. The other phases are 226, 228, 2030, and 2032, respectively, and they will just proceed along the Euro standards. So the most disciplined phase will be the Euro 6 standard for petrol in 2032. Today, that may seem disciplined, but we're talking about a year that is 7 years from now, or let's say 8 in a couple of months. So this is pretty lenient, we think. And after 2028, it will actually be for everyone. Now, the low emission zone is in the downtown area of Warsaw. It is defined as 37 square kilometers of Warsaw, 7% of the area of the city. And so far, it has been based on stickers, but it probably will be transitioned into a digital controlling mode. If you don't abide, and if you enter the city with a older Euro standard, then you have to pay 500 zloty, which is about 100 euros of a bill. Hence, I'm saying this is not a very ambitious low emission zone. The goals are that within the first half a year of the functioning, we will exclude 2% of the current fleet and reduce NOxs by 11% already against 2022 levels, because that's when the last remote measurement of air quality was recorded. By 2032, we want to increase it to 27% of the fleet that's excluded from this low emission zone, and a reduction of 80% of NOxs as an effect against 2022 data. Is this great? This is for you to evaluate. For PM, the biggest PM 2.5, this is 20% today and 70% by 2032. Those are the reduction levels. Now, how do we deploy it? Well, it was very much based on public consultation. It took 3 months, 90 days to consult this low emission zone. And in the beginning, the actual proposals were much more ambitious than they are in effect, as we see today. Altogether, the city gathered 3,000 remarks within this process, many of them highly, highly critical of course, the low emission zone, mostly populist arguments that I think this has to be said very clearly. And this is also significant because the city actually took a step back and made it a little less ambitious than it is. One, I think, important observation here was that the public consultation process was supported by one of the NGOs working with us on the topic and one of the leading NGOs in Poland along with us as well. And this was also criticized a little, that the public consultations are supported by an organization that is in favor of the low emission zone. So one has to be very cautious here, and the city also has to be very cautious, and every other local authority, in who it chooses for support in this public consultation, because you really have to watch out for it to be unbiased. So from my point of view and from Poland, I wanted to be concise. I know we have a panel discussion after. That's basically the wide picture.
Thank you, Alexander. This was fantastic. I think both the planners in the audience, which we have plenty, as well as institutions, have questions. We're going to now invite also Marcus to join, since Martinez had to leave, and Arne from Ghent is joining us at 5. So we're going to have Marcus, yourself, Alexander, and Marcus joining the conversation here. We'll try to have at least 10 minutes for the next, short exchange between ourselves, and myself and Anjit leading the conversation for the main takeaways. And then around, again, I would say 10 to 12 minutes, we're going to have questions from the audience, either from the Slido or just raising a hand from the institutions. But before we do that, let's just delve into some of the issues here that we've heard about before. And again, as I think the still presentations are quite clear in mind. If that's okay, Alexander, I would like to start with 2 questions running from Poland. Again, not just Warsaw, but in Poland in general. Again, perhaps I hope this is not a painful point for you. The case of Krakow, you did share with us that example and that case wasn't as successful as it could have been. And if you possibly, again, not to sort of pick on Krakow, point them out, by no means this is bullying on our behalf. But if you could just expand a little bit on if this was solely an issue of communication that involving the citizens, involving the stakeholders and parties, or was there anything else that we should take away from Krakow's case regarding the reaching out to people, informing them in advance, telling what this is going to be about, so that we would have involvement in right capacity. So if possible, again, if you could share your experience from Krakow and then perhaps other Polish cities which did a better job.
Well, I mean, so far we've only had, and thanks for the question, of course. And so far we've only had 2 approaches on actually deploying a low emission zone in Poland. So the discussion and consultation is going on in a number of cities, but 2 actually officially said the low emission zone is in place. Now, the Warsaw one is very much in place as it's already existing right now. And it's being official, and this is no going back really. The Krakow one, back when it was introduced, was not based on the same formal foundation. So the law was very vague. It basically said that cities should deploy low emission zones. It said that cities above, I think back then it was 500,000 inhabitants. It was really only about 4 cities in Poland, actually. So quite a vague regulation, really. And Krakow also approached the situation in a pretty vague way. So first of all, it mostly regarded a historically important area of Krakow with a district that used to be the old Jewish district in Krakow. It's very, very popular it's a very popular area in the city today. Very kind of full of youth and arts and restaurants and bars, and very kind of vivacious. And I think that was also part of the approach to get vehicles maybe out of that area a little bit. It also defined the vehicles as zero emission and low emission. So it favored HEVs, which for an organization like us, for example, PSNM today, back then PSPA, we don't promote hybrids or plug-in hybrids because we consider them just emission vehicles and ICE vehicles. So, and I think this is the only way you can technically do that. So back then, it actually did allow hybrids and plug-in hybrids into the city. It was, I mean, some of the manufacturers, the OEMs who are very much into that technology were also involved in promoting the low emission zone. But that was, of course, 2018, 6 years ago, or even now close to 7 years ago. So that's a different time. But anyway, so lack of communication, very low, I think, detail in the regulatory sphere, very vague kind of definition of vehicles that can enter, very vague definition of all the potential intricate details that today in the Warsaw low emission zone are in place. Basically, every question you ask about the low emission in Warsaw, I think, can be answered. I think back then, if you had half of those questions for Kraków, the answer might be, I'm going to have to get back to you later because I'm not sure. So that's a little bit of the problem. But I mean, what we have to take into mind, and that's why I put so much emphasis on the process and less on the actual low emission zone we have. If you look at some of the, because Oslo is really, and I know Marcus and we've been to Oslo and showing our local governments on how to do this, and the Oslo solution is great. Of course, you have to have a certain architecture of the urban area to have that, but it's a great model, and the public consultation and communication process there was huge. So we are aware of this, and this is the learning process we have. But in reality, our cities don't have the 10 or 20 years that many cities in the West had. We have about 5 or 6 years that we have to really catch up because we have to have these low emission zones. We have horribly bad air pollution in cities. And so this is very important to really take in all the learnings from the cities, from the nearly 400 low emission zones in Western Europe that are existent, to really make ours work. And that's very important. And I think some of the learnings have been introduced in Warsaw, but I think the consultation and communication aspect was the most, maybe not dangerous, but most impactful, because that is what caused the city council to take a step back and say, okay, so at the beginning, the people who are in the Warsaw don't have to abide. At the beginning, maybe let's start with, Euro 2. I mean, in Warsaw, you will rarely find a Euro 2 vehicle. I mean, rarely. It's absolute, so it's a little bit of a fictional solution for today. But that's because of the political risk. And so one has to keep that in mind when doing these consultations, to be very cautious of these risks. And you wanted to ask about other cities. Wrocław is also doing a very good job, and Wrocław is a city, so it's third or fourth city depending on how you define the size. It's about 700,000-800,000 inhabitants, quite industrial, very business kind of developed city. It also has a nice old area, so it has all the aspects of a big European city. It's located, it has actually 3 main rivers, but 5 rivers altogether in the city. So that's a little bit of a specificity that it has. Not every city has this kind of characteristic. But that also makes it interesting because Wrocław announced that it would plan its low emission zone along these river banks. So that would make it very, I think, interesting to define the borders of the city, because in Warsaw, they're defined by streets. And so Warsaw went as far as saying, okay, the streets that are borders are not part of the zone. Only what's within the city, the street border. And then Wrocław said, okay, so these rivers will be our borders, right? We'll make a triangle, and that will make it very interesting along the bridges to enter, and then you're in the low emission zone. So Wrocław has not deployed this low emission zone yet. One has to take into account that we had local government elections this year. So many cities that were very intensely working towards low emission zones kind of stepped back and said, okay, let's wait until the elections. come back to the topic after that. So we are now after the election, and they're slowly coming back to the topic. But I think it is very possible that Wrocław will be along the next cities. Then we have Pomerania and the Tri-City area. So we have 3 cities that are joined, as you may know, Gdańsk, Gdynia, and Sopot. These are, they have no physical border, these cities, they're connected. But of course, there are administrative borders. And they're planning a low emission zone, but they're also thinking about maybe making it a kind of transition low emission zone between 3 cities. So we don't have a defined area yet, but highly advanced in terms of consultation, looking at the digital measurement technologies, and this is very interesting. And then we also have, out of the big cities, we are talking with Torun. That's one of the cities also in northern Poland, a medieval city. And they're also looking at a low emission zone. Interestingly enough, not in the downtown area, which is actually something we sometimes recommend, because sometimes it may be easier to deploy a low emission zone in a residential area. So this is also an interesting aspect. And yeah, I think you know, Łódź is talking about a low emission zone, but this is far off. This is still in a very early phase of discussion. Rzeszów is in an early phase of discussion, and Kielce are in an early phase of discussion. So when we have the next one, hard to say. But they are declaring that it should be soon. And as you know, our resilience and recovery facility has just kicked in due to political reasons. So we'll see, but they don't have much time, because in reality, they have until the end of 2026.
Thanks, Alexander. Thanks, Markus, for holding on. I think this was a great wrap up on the context. And again, thanks, Alexander, for moving out of just Warsaw and taking into bigger picture, since Warsaw is a massive capital, including its metropolitan area. And I think that your comment also provides context, in fact, that how different the case of Krakow and Warsaw are, and how Warsaw took some of the learnings into account when thinking about that, yet with a cautious warning that we have to keep in mind that the politics, especially populism, plays into how ambitious municipalities are, and in fact losing some of the ground or giving in the ground which shouldn't be there. I think this is fantastic to take in. Right, Markus, perhaps let's move on to the Scandinavian example, and I think that this was pointed out by Alexander quite well, that you've had perhaps a longer runaway for this issue, and generally mentality of citizens is more keen. That said, the toll roads have been instrumental in making this low emission zone down to earth, understandable, and comprehensible for citizens. So perhaps from your perspective, what has worked in Norway and what hasn't worked when thinking about perhaps more livable and sustainable and perhaps cleaner cities as well?
Thank you so much, and I would also, of course, agree that this, if you put it into a larger context, it's been a one policy piece of many in Norway to introduce and to accelerate the EV adoption in Norway. And I think why we didn't move for low emission zones in the beginning was that it needed a lot of national regulation to be able to, for the cities to be able to do it, because both Oslo and Bergen and a lot of cities wanted to introduce not only low emission zones but zero emission zones, but it wasn't possible due to a lot of regulations needed to be changed at the national level. And then the argument from the national government was that we want to financially incentivize EV adoption instead of making hurdles and hindering people who need to drive their gasoline or petrol car around. So instead of making it illegal or prohibited, they wanted to use the existing infrastructure of the toll rings. That said, your question is what worked and what didn't work. I would say that the elections in around 2017 and 2019 did show a big challenge with all of these policies, and it was we got this new party running for election called the anti-toll ring party. Basically, that was the only thing that they were focused on, and they, in some of these cities with the highest toll rates around the cities, they got up to 10 to 15% of the election of the voters in their first elections, which is a landslide and was very, very, very shocking for many. So we saw that the toll ring policy can be a huge challenge when it comes to public acceptance. But what we also saw that when we had, because this was the general toll ring policy, like increasing toll rings in general for everybody. But with introducing a discount for EVs and more people found the way to buy an EV, it became more and more accepted because the high toll rates were only for those who in the beginning couldn't buy an EV, but now we would say don't want to buy an EV or resist buying an EV. So we saw that anti-toll ring movement kind of decreased quite fast when the EVs were better, when the EVs actually managed to be an alternative for most people, and especially when EVs also came to the second-hand market, because after a while you get EVs also penetrating the second-hand market, which made also a social impact to this, because then it was not only for the new car buyers that could get this discount, but obviously giving a discount for EVs in general, if it's purchase prices or if it's in toll rings, in the beginning it was giving discounts to the richest part of Norway, which was very, very difficult to defend. But the whole theory is that if all the new cars introduced to the market are electric, then you will get a big second-hand market after a while, and this happened and people saw it, and then suddenly EVs became something that most people could afford to buy. And then you had a good thing about this toll ring system, because then you could kind of it became kind of a life hack for people to buy an EV, to drive cheaper around in these areas. And then you also managed to skip the whole going from Euro 4, Euro 5, Euro 6, like all of these steps, because I think that's also what we saw, and also what especially the governments in Oslo and Bergen, some of the big cities, saw that they were not that interested in having all of these small steps going, like for lowering emission. They wanted to stop emissions from each and every car coming into the market. So, but we also found ourselves in a kind of a squeeze between I could say the fossil fuel interest, or the people who are angry at the toll ring system being, and the toll ring rates being too high, but also in a squeeze on the other side, the promoters of biking, walking, and public transportation, seeing that there's a lot of new cars entering the cities for a very cheap price, like the EVs could enter the cities without paying much, maybe challenging the traffic situation a bit. So I think it was a very good move when we went from free passing for EVs to a discounted pass for EVs, because then you kind of also managed to get knowledge like for the EVs or the EV drivers to contribute to the community, because income from the toll rings were actually spent on public transportation, bike lanes, etc. And that was when we talked about when we had our friends from Poland in Oslo. I think it's 1.5 years ago now. We had a meeting with the mayor of Oslo, and she said that one of the most important things that they did was to talk about why we do this. Talk about, be honest about the consequences. It's more difficult to drive. It will be less access for cars, especially with cars with emissions. But what we get out of it is greener spaces, lungs. We had kindergartens who had to close during daytime because there was too much air pollution. But then she could show that this is slowly bettering, and then also could show that when we introduced money for or charging from EVs, then she could show that they are also contributing to the public transportation, etc., etc. So it's kind of it was a balance act, and I think they didn't get it right in the 2017 election. Then we saw the consequence, but then introducing and finding a way to show that this is this is a balance. And then also a lot more people started to buy EV, so then you accepted the toll rings a bit more. It was kind of I think there was a stroke of luck there as well. But I think one of the reasons why they did it was to use the already existing architecture and also skip all of the steps of just moving from one emission rate to another and another, and just saying that we are going for EVs. We know that that will cut emissions eventually, and that's what the strategy is all about.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Alexander. That was our 10 minutes, 15 minutes of little wrapping up. I'm going to now open up the floor for the questions from the audience. We have quite a few people still, 93 people, quarter of an hour to end of the working day. So this is a good audience, a good 100 people here. We have one question here before Armands can open up the question. Andrzej, do you have any questions or comments, recommendations from your side, from City of Riga, before we open up the room for the public questions? Andrzej?
I think we open up the room. I already typed in one question for the Alexander. Great presentations. Yeah, maybe I can just voice the one that I wrote down. I was thinking about in your case, in the Poland's case, has there been a significant push from society, from stakeholders on providing high quality alternatives? What we've seen in Riga, some people say that they, in theory, are for the low emission zone, and then there comes many demands from their side. We need to have perfect public transportation. We need to have that. And I usually say that we cannot postpone implementation of low emission zone until this utopia comes, because those are processes in parallel. But have you seen similar attitudes in your experience, and how you have tackled and maybe shown that, okay, there's this investment plan for the next 3-5 years and so on? What could you suggest in this case? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. So I think the greatest part of the arguments regarding low emission zones were phrased as basically it being a ban for ICE vehicles. So very little was demanded that cities should add any potential, better urban commuting services. That being said, there have been voices like this, but in Warsaw, the truth is that the public transport in the downtown area, because there are areas that are excluded slightly, and this is something that the city, I know, is planning to change, is developing 3 new tram lines. It's really, Warsaw is just a hub of investment currently, also in the public sphere in terms of transport and everything else. But the downtown area, we have subways, trams, zero-emission buses. Warsaw is the 3rd biggest fleet of zero-emission buses. So for the low-emission zone that was really deployed here, I don't think this issue would have been raised that much, because it's already quite good, and we have some park and ride areas around the city perimeters, and I think a lot is possible to do here. So that has been raised very little, but it has been raised in Wrocław and Kraków, and that I know. It also has been raised in the Tree City area, so that's definitely happening. However, there are so many investments ongoing in each of these cities in terms of public transport, that I think this will be easy to resolve. One thing that the national public administration is also doing, and I think it's, so again, this hasn't been done in the best way, but it's a very good initiative, so to say, are subsidies for e-bikes. And this is a really cool idea, I think, because it's also something that really, I think, makes it more accessible. Because, of course, for a city that is quite big, also geographically is kind of spaced out as Warsaw, but also Wrocław would be a city like that as well. A normal bicycle is more of an athletic solution. But an electric bicycle is a very good solution, actually, and it allows you to cover much more area, and it's also, I think, good for you, and so it combines the best of both worlds. So the fact that the national government is planning a subsidy for electric bicycles for everyone to use, not even in cities but also outside of cities, is exactly the kind of things that need to happen. It's also to make people aware that there are other solutions. Okay, if it rains, you have the metro or the tram, but if it doesn't, perhaps you could take your electric bicycle. So I think those kinds of multimodal solutions are exactly where we need to go for. I'm not an enthusiast of e-scooters, but of course they are in a way also an alternative solution. And of course, although this needs to be managed by the cities, and I think everyone knows what the problems and pitfalls here are, but in general, there has been very little voiced about that in the public consultations. So it's mostly usually saying, will the low emission expand? Will I be banned from it? What will the punishment and the sanction be? And so on. Those are the kind of questions that are most abundant. And it's very rare for people to ask, oh, okay, well, I have a new tram line available for me if I live in this or that part. That's much more rare.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Markus. I'm going to now shift to Latvian to our audiences in webinar. Tātad droši rakstam jautājumus čata režīmā, kuru mēs redzam rīkļos, lai jautājumi un atbildes. Es tagad nolasīšu arī jautājumu, kas ir no Jūlijas doktoravas par elektroauto iegādes perspektīvām, un drošības pēc piesaku sekojušo lietu. Mēs turpmākās 10 minūtes vēl veltīsim jautājumiem un atbildēm no mūsu ekspertiem, un 5:00 mums pievienosies arī vēl viens eksperts no Ģentes pilsētas, tā kā mums papildināsies, tā kā droši visiem kolēģiem, kuriem ir iespēja, paliekam līdz 15 minūtes pār 5, lai būtu jautājumi no Ģentes. Ja kādam ir jāskrien, protams, paldies jums, ieraksts būs pieejams, kā arī tiekamies ar daļiem no jums no 4. decembrī, bet drošības pēc piesaka, ja tad mums ir vēl 10 minūtes jautājumiem šajā formātā. Droši rakstīt jautājumus arī latviski, es pārtulkošu viņus angļu valodā, lai nebūtu jānopūlās, un arī līdzīgi, kā Armands ir pacēls rokas, vienkārši ievērošu to tehniku, ja, kad Julija pajautāja pirmā, un tad Armands nākošais, un, protams, 5:00 mums pievienojas eksperts no Ģentes, kuram mēs varēsim pajautāt līdzīgs jautājums. Gentlemen, we have a question here regarding the purchasing capacity. The EVs are still quite expensive, and I think this is where we differ from Norway. Even with some of the help from the government in forms of subsidies, EVs are still unavailable for most families in Latvia. So perhaps what would be your suggestion how to go about framing the argument for low emission zones outside of EV purchasing capacity? Perhaps that's a question for both Markus and Alexander, perhaps a minute for you both. Markus, would you like to start?
Yeah, I can start. I think my answer to that is, of course, being aware that there's differences in the prices, and I think that comes from that. In Norway, we did introduce a lot of different policies at the same time. And I think, I don't think the EV policy in the toll rings would have worked without the exemption for purchase taxes and exemption for VAT when value-added tax when you purchase an EV, of course. I think the difference between EVs and internal combustion engines when it comes to price is we're closing into a price parity. So I don't think that problem will be as big as it was. Alexander is more of an expert on this than me, so he could probably elaborate a bit on that. But we're closing into price parity, and I think that would also be important for if you talking about like a 2 or 3 or 4 year perspective here. These prices might not be that different in the beginning, but of course it will be new cars mostly, and that's expensive. In Norway, it was also that only 20% of car purchases in Norway are new cars, so most people are buying second-hand cars in Norway as well. But we need to start somewhere with the transition. And then the Norwegian government, together with cities, decided that also the toll rings could be one place to ensure that that transition happened faster. And what we saw was that it really increased the tempo of that transition. And then we could see when we get the EVs on the second-hand car market, the toll ring policy is one of the good policies that also affects the second-hand car market as well when it comes to EV transition.
Thank you, Markus. Alexander, any comments on your side? Again, I would say that the purchasing capacity and parity in Poland is comparable more to the Baltic region than to Norway, I would think. So perhaps the range is expanding. The prices of cars are decreasing when compared to a 10-year period. So where would Poland stand with this?
Well, I think, yeah, first of all, we do have to have in mind the wider picture, which is that, first of all, battery prices are decreasing, which makes electric vehicle prices decreasing as well. While I think the policies and regulations are making ICE vehicles more expensive. This is because both of the hydrocarbon fuels that are becoming more expensive and difficult to trade, and then also because of the vehicles themselves that will be less available. So in the end, I think the process that one has to take into account is that in 2027 that's not so far away. It's really very close. It's just 2 years. The price parity in the EU will be nearly equal for all categories and segments of vehicles between ICE and BEV. So this is very important to keep in mind. By 2030 or 2032, within that 2-year period, we will have a massive drop of availability of ICE vehicles. So you will go into a dealership and it will not be a question of price. It'll be a question of even finding an ICE vehicle. It'll be very rare because OEMs in Europe will not be selling ICE vehicles. It's not that the 2035 phase out will happen like this. It will happen over years. So that process will start at the end of this decade. Again, not very far off. Now, that's the wide picture. In terms of what's happening here, definitely yes. So we in Poland have a subsidy for new electric vehicles. We're working on a subsidy for used electric vehicles, a very important solution already functioning in Lithuania and functioning well. And so this is important. Subsidies are not the solution, but subsidies are a Kickstarter. They're a very good first step for changing these things. So that's another thing. And second of all, it's the perspective. So in Poland, 20% of the BEVs that are bought, new BEVs that are bought, are premium BEVs. This is a proportion that is not the same for the ICE vehicles. For the ICE vehicles, it's much, much smaller. It's less than 5% of premium vehicles that are being bought. So if you look at that, that really makes the look on the average of price a little bit biased, because you're thinking about it that it's expensive, but if you take into account that one in every 5 vehicles that are bought BEVs are premium, of course they're more expensive, but every premium vehicle is more expensive. So that's also very important to understand. In Poland, we have 136 models of BEV available today, already on the market at mass scale. You can go into and buy a BEV. The majority of those vehicles are very affordable. I think just below 30 are at below 150,000 zloty, which is about 35,000 euros. So below 35,000 euros. And I don't think that's with the subsidy available in Poland. I don't know about Latvia. That makes them very affordable, even compared to affordable ICE models. So of course, that's one of the topics that has to be discussed. But what I think has to be promoted when we're talking about low emission zones and urban mobility, and OEMs don't like this, but it's shared mobility and mobility as a service. We have to understand that in urban areas, we have to develop the whole kind of mentality that vehicles can be shared. 70% of the entire lifetime of the vehicle, it is parked in average in Europe. So this is where shared mobility becomes the best potential solution. So for the person who cannot afford a BEV, for many reasons, and I understand that, even with all those topics that I discussed before and arguments before, if they cannot afford it, they will surely be able to afford to drive a vehicle if they really need to drive a vehicle that belongs to a shared mobility network. So this is very important to understand. We're not trying to make cities filled with electric vehicles. We're trying to make cities have less vehicles, be more spacious, be more kind of liberated. And whoever actually lives in very intense downtown regions, and I did for a long time in my life. I lived in one of the most kind of historical downtown regions in areas in Warsaw. I hated cars because they're parked all over the place. You can't walk freely, and you really understand the sense of that. So if you have shared mobility and multi-modality available, those are the two main topics that you need in a city to replace combustion engine vehicles. So if you can't buy a car, share a car, and that would be the best. Of course, this depends on the city and the businesses in the city, not on the inhabitants alone.
Thank you, Alexander. Markus, I'm going to wrap up some of the takeaways from you into Latvian audience. Tad, kolēģi, visi, kas mūs klausās, man liekas, 3 mums galvenās idejas, kas ir izskanējušas, pirms mēs pārējām pie nākošās tēmas. Kolēģi no mums organizatoras puses tagad padalīsies ar ekrānu par jautājumiem, kā mums ir gājis, kā mēs uztveram šo zemes emisiju zonas tematiku, vai mēs esam kaut ko jaunu iemācījušies un sapratuši. Tā kā lūdzu, slaido platformā atbildam uz jautājumu līdzīgi, kā mēs sākam, tā kā iekavas savā ziņā, jā, ar ko mēs sākam, ko mēs beidzām. Kamēr jūs to darat, es varbūt apkopošu dažas no galvenām atziņām, kas mums izskanēja no mūsu ekspertiem. Tātad pirmais, kas bija, man liekas, absolūti jautājums un komentārs vietā, vai zemes emisijas zona nav vienkārši veids, kā mēs sekmējam jaunu auto iegādi, tikai šoreiz tie būtu elektroauto, kas ir turklāt dārgi. Nē, situācija ir pietiekoši mainījusies. Pieņemsim, Lietuva ir ieviesusi subsīdijas lietot elektroauto iegādi, nevis jauno, kas mums liekas tā teikt pāri galvai daudziem. Numur 2. Tuvākās dekādas laikā iekšzemes dzinēju automašīnu skaits principā samazināsies. Tā nav nekāda sazvērniecība, tas ir kopējs Eiropas un arī pasaules kurss. Ja, tā kā, teiksim, 5-6 gadu laikā jautājuma mašīnu pieejamība būs sarežģīta un cenas izlīdzināsies. Ja, tā skaitā lietot auto tirgus palēnāsies un bateriju ilgums un darbības laiks būs pietiekoši normāls. Mēs runājam par vairākiem 100 kilometru, nevis kā 19. gada Golfs, kuram, kā mēs jokojam, ir 50-60 km range, ar ko tā īsti nekur aizbraukt nevar. Numur 2. Polija ir aktivizējusi elektrovelosipēdu iegādes subsīdijas, proti, ne visiem ierodas ar mašīnām, elektrovelosipēds ir pietiekoši labs risinājums. Un būtiski, arī mūsu eksperti iesaka to, ka mums nav jāizvieto vienkārši parastās mašīnas ar elektroauto. Tas droši vien, ka būtu nevēlams virziens, ka mūsu pilsēta ir pielikt ar mašīnām, kā bija līdz šim. Tā vietā mēs domājam par koplietošanas auto attīstību. Pirms 7 gadiem mums nebija koplietošanas auto, tagad viņi ir daudz, viņi ir pilsētā, un tas ir viens no veidiem, kā mēs kopēju apjomu samazinām, jo projām auto var būt priekš izmantošanas nedēļas nogalēs. Tā kā tas liekas interesants virziens, un, protams, arī sabiedriskais transports, ko principā, tā skaitā Eiropa, kā lielākais investors Latvijā, skatās uz to, kādā veidā sabiedriskais transports kļūst pār mugurkaulu pēc pārvietošanās, un finansējums arī no Eiropas nāk ne tikai jaunu pārvadu vai jaunu maģistrālu izbūvē, bet galvenokārt sabiedriskā transporta attīstībai, ar ko rēķinās arī gan nacionālās valdības, gan arī pašvaldības. Ja? Tad mēs raugamies uz sabiedrisko transportu galvenā pārvietošanās formātu. Lūk, redzam mūsu tā teikt, ideju un apkopojumu mākoni, ar ko mums saistās ZEZ, gaisa kvalitāte, sabiedrības iesaist gājēji, nacionāls regulējums, mazāk auto drošība, iespēja burkāns ierobežot satiksme. Ja, tad vismaz daļa no mums ir nobalsojusi, ja projām sarunā piedalās vairāk kā 76 cilvēki, tā kā aktīvi varam šo nobalsot, novērtēt, ar ko mums zemes emisijas zona joprojām saistās, un es ceru, ka mēs šīs sarunas laikā, pēc sarunas ar ekspertiem, esam kļuvuši par soli mazliet zinošāki un pieredzējušāki par to, kādā veidā šādas zemes emisijas zonas ir. Kā dzirdējām no mūsu ekspertiem, Rietumē Eiropā tādas ir vairāk kā 400. Ja? Šis nav kas, ko Rīga izgudro savās vajadzībās, šī plaša un aktuāla tēma. Un gan Austrumē Eiropa, gan Rietumē Eiropa ļoti aktīvi uz šiem instrumentiem pārveidojās. Lūk, paldies kolēģiem. Es domāju, ka mēs varam iet priekš ar nākošo jautājumu, kas mums ir kā auditorijai domāts, ko mēs varam nomērīt pulsu, nomērīt mūsu izpratni par to, kā mēs esam sapratuši tematiku. Kamēr mēs lasām, tad kas jūs, prāt, ir labā praksa, ko Rīga varētu īstenot, ko Rīga varētu pārņemt no Oslo, Ģentes, Polijas pilsētām vai Kaunas, rakstam mūsu viedokļus, rakstam mūsu idejas, slaido platformā. Kamēr tas notiekās, jautājums no Armanda. Es pieņemu, Armand, tu esi ilgi noturējis rokas, ceru, ka roka nav nogurusi. Droši jautā vai nu latviski vai angliski pēc saviem ieskatiem. Ja kādam vēl kāds jautājums, droši ceļam roku vai rakstam jautājumu un atbilžu formātā. Droši, Armand, jautājums latviski vai angliski pēc saviem ieskatiem.
Okay, I will try to speak English. Basically, around 30% of Riga parking in the center is already taken by electric cars. So we already get such a problem. And it's already a problem because electric cars can park in Riga by free. The second thought is we can look at also at the London experience. And in London, there is like a big difference in the voting. For example, the persons who are in the center, where is this zone, they vote for that, and the persons who are outside the zone, they typically vote against that. And the third thing, I'm pro big zone, because in Riga it's quite simple to do that. We have like historical part, and there is the second historical part on both sides of Daugava, and they are both like guarded by the rail. And therefore, I'm speaking that we need to make as big zone as possible without the transit. Because if we make the biggest zone, we also have like Latvian legislation which affects us. And then if we have a bigger zone, then we can get best results with less problems, because I think we already have like a lot of regulations in place and a lot of targets to meet, but we do nothing. And yes, I agree with your comments that basically we don't need to wait for some golden eye or something happen to do that. We just need to do that and guard the zone, and that's all. Thank you.
Paldies Armandam. Thank you, Armands. Markus, Alexander, any comments and feedback on Armands' question?
I can just very quickly on the challenge when the free parking is filled with EVs, which is a good sign though. That means people are buying EVs, which is a good thing. But we had the same challenge in Oslo, and what they did, because it was free parking for EVs in Oslo as well. And when more and more people started to buy EVs, they had this challenge that the parking spots were taken. They introduced payment for EVs as well, but they introduced I think it was 10 or 20% of the regular fee of that payment. And when they did that, at the same time, they increased the regular fee after introducing that fee with the same amount as EVs were charged. So it became relatively the same discount in actual payment for EVs. So you're kind of introducing a fee, but you're also increasing the other fee to have the same incentive for changing to an EV. And when it comes to that, more and more EVs are taking place in the streets. We saw in Oslo with this kind of way of thinking that we haven't had a bigger increase of cars in general than it was before the EVs. So the growth in cars have not been bigger after we have introduced all of these EV incentives. But that's because they also used a lot of money on public transportation at the same time, and also managed to kind of say that we want reduction in cars in general, but those cars who are going to stay, they need to be incentivized to be an electric vehicle.
Thank you, Markus. Alexander, please.
Yeah, in Poland, the regulation that makes city parking free for BEVs, and also at the same time allowing BEVs to use bus lanes, is expiring at the end of 2026. So it's only natural that this will just end. And I think it's also a very good thing that the subsidy ends, because obviously you want more BEVs in the fleet. So when you have more, you should limit those subsidies. So that is the solution that is here. That's how it's regulated here. I don't know the Latvian solution, but I presume it probably has an expiry date as well, or an expiration date. So I think that's the best solution for this, is to just one day treat BEVs as normal cars, because that's what they should be. So it's a transitive solution, and I think that problem will pass. In terms of how large the low emission zone is, I think that depends on the kind of social issues you have with the whole solution. If there is little backlash, then yeah, we can make it big. I think for cities that are experiencing serious backlash, it's always easier to make it smaller. For Warsaw, so the only existent low emission zone in Poland, that would require another vote in the city council and another round of 90-day public consultations to make it even 1 meter bigger. So for now, that is not going to happen.
Thank you, Alexander. I'm going to switch to Latvian again. Tātad, kolēģi, nākošais mums ir tālvaldes Astrāns. Droši tālvaldes slēdz iekšā mikrofonu vai latvisko vai angliski, kā pēc iespējām. Pārējiem dalībniekiem mēs slēdzam nākošo jautājumu iekšā mūsu slaido platformā. Tikko mums bija jautājums par to, kāda labā praksa, ko var īstenot Rīgā. To mēs esam apkopojuši. Paldies gan par iesaisti, gan par reorganizāciju. Kas jūs nebūtu īstenams Rīgā? Proti, ko mums nevajadzētu darīt, no kādām kļūdām mums vajadzētu atteikties. Kamēr jūs rakstat, tālvaldes Astrāna, sveiki, prieks jūs redzēt. Jautājums latviski vai angliski, un kam adresēts drošības pēc, lai mēs zinām, ar ko ir darīšana.
Jā, latviski es ātri izstāstīšu par mūsu mazo pieredzi, kas mums jau ir. Tātad mēs esam sagatavojuši no valsts politikas likuma viedokļu likumu. Likums būs līdzīgs, es nezinu, čaļi jau nezinu, no ārzemēm mums ir jūrmala līdzīgs, tātad kā jūrmalā ielu nodevu likums. Tas, izklausās tā diezgan barbariski, bet tas ir tieši tā arī balstīts, lai šo kontroles zonu varētu kaut kādīgi finansēt, lai tā nebūtu vienkārši pilsētai pliki no savu maciņu jāizmet ārā. Un man ļoti patika Aleksandrā pieeja, kā centrā nav jābūt mašīnām daudz vispār. Mums tās ir nenormāli daudz, un tāpēc pilsētas centrs ir pilnīgi nelietojams un nenormāli lietojams. Un sabiedriskam transportam tas nav lietojams. Kas ir tas būtiskākais? Un šeit ir tā atbilde, ko mēs darīsim, lai šis sabiedriskais transports būtu labāks. Izvāksim mašīnas ārā no centra, un sabiedriskais transports pats pa sevi paliks jau krietni pievilcīgāks pat bez būtiska uzlabojuma. Tātad mums ir šis likums sagatavošanā. Visa Latvijas publika lūdzu, kas ar šo saistīt, lūdzu iesaistieties, dodiet savu ieguldījumu, kā lai šo likumu darītu labāk, jo tur ir 4. nodaļa ielu nodevu likums. Paldies!
Paldies, Vesterāna kungs. Šis paliekās daži no latviešu pusē. Mēs to nodevu likumu neiesim diskutēt ar kolēģiem. Es domāju, šeit mums ir jāpaliekās mūsu pusē tranšais. Tā, tikai ir ieslēgts mikrofonu vai paralēli. Tā, Gatis Pūcītis. Tātad, kolēģi, drošības pēc prieks dzirdēt, ka ministrija nāk tālāk, ka pašvaldība nav tā teikt līdzēju glābšanas līdzēju pašrokās, ir papildus likums, kas palīdzēs šo jautājumu pieaugt pie zemes abām kājām, tā skaitā ar mērķi, lai mēs virzamies uz eiropeiskāku pilsētu, kur pilsēta ir domāta priekš tāda izaugsmas, attīstības, nevis stāvietas mašīnas mašīnai uz galvas, sabiedriskais transports, kurš pārvadā 10 cilvēku atvainojas stāv aiz viena Audija vai Forda, kurš lēnā garā šiverē pa pilsētu. Mēs gribētu, ka mūsu pilsēta šajā ziņā kļūst modernāka un arī mūsdienīgāka. Tā kā prieks par to, ka ministrija iet uz priekšu, un arī Vesterāna kunga aicinājums visām pusēm, kas ir iesaistīts, šo likuma projektu izskatīt, rekomendēt, komentēt, dot, lai viņi būtu pēc iespējas praktiskāks, pragmatiskāks un dzīvot spējīgāks. Tātad tik tā mēs esam tikuši. Es redzu arī, ka mums arī Slido platformā lēnā garā pievienojas arī daži komentāri. Tie ir patreiz 5 cilvēki, sarunāja 67, tā kā droši kādam ir savs komentārs, rakstam Slido platformā, lai mums būtu laba arī atdeve no šīs sarunas. Tā, kolēģi, arī, ja ir vēl kāds papildus jautājums, es nolasīšu vēl 2, kas mums šeit ir. Un tagad pāriešu uz angļu valodu. Marcus Alexander, we have a comment here from two of the participants. One is, I would say, perhaps going towards Alexander regarding the experience from Amsterdam. That the e-bikes, obviously, we're dealing with different speeds here. And you did mention that there's subsidies on use of e-bikes. However, Amsterdam is commenting that we're seeing an increased amount of accidents happening due to e-bikes. So, that's a potential there, but also a bit of precaution. Have you seen a similar trend in Poland from, new player coming into conversation, so to say, quote unquote, and the differing speeds and variability from e-bike and a typical bike causing perhaps a spike into accidents? Is this something that you could share from Poland as well?
As I said, this is something that's still developing in Poland. Definitely, there has been a spike in accidents for e-scooters. That's why I said this is a topic that has to be regulated. I don't think there would be a spike from e-bikes. What I think, though, if you reduce the number of cars in the city, then that will reduce the number of accidents, really, because I understand these e-bikes are mostly collisions with vehicles, not with people. So because people have been riding bicycles in Warsaw, Kraków, or Wrocław for ages, we have bike lanes. Obviously, cities do have to develop more bike lanes, and that is something to be done. But I don't think e-bikes would be a problem here. An electric bicycle is not a bicycle where you can go faster than a normal bicycle. It supports your potential effort that you put into the biking process. So when you pedal, you get support from the electric powertrain, but that doesn't mean you can go 50 miles an hour or something like that. For an e-scooter, that is a whole different topic, and you have much less control. And also, there is always the problem of people driving together and everything else. I know from even medical sources in Warsaw that there has been a spike in concussions and many other injuries. But that is e-scooters. E-scooters, I emphasize, not e-bikes.
Thank you, Alexander. We have Arne Run from Ghent joining the conversation. Arne, are you with us? If you could please turn on the microphone and as well as the camera, we'd be happy to see you. Arne?
Hey, I'm here.
Great. So we have City of Ghent joining conversation here. And again, still we have about 60 people in the webinar. So thanks, Marcus and Alexander. I think that this wraps up the part we've been sort of making you work extra hours here on your broad shoulders from Poland and Norway. Now we're shifting our gears to Ghent. So thanks, Marcus. Thanks, Alexander. Very much appreciate it. I think we'll be back with you in more depth conversation with the City of Riga. So thank you so much. And Arne, now the floor is yours.
Thank you.
We had fantastic step in from Mark from Riga here, and well presenting the case of Ghent. But again, perhaps some questions we'd like to inform and perhaps hear from your own experience. Especially, I have two questions in mind. One is that you have phrased this as low emission zone coach. Why did you think that low emission zone coach was necessary? How did that work? And how long did you take as a municipality to address various social groups in this coach capacity? And second of all, is marking low emission zone through the prism of products, different availability of products in low emission zone. So perhaps if you could comment on these two, we very much appreciate that.
All right. Regarding the first question, so the low emission zone coach, it sounds a bit weird now because coach is also a bus, as you mentioned it. But this man was in charge of trying to massage the regulation into different stakeholders. Could be just civilians, but more importantly, different economic groups, different all kinds of different stakeholders. He would have meetings with them and see what their grievances would have been. So we could maybe adapt our regulations a little bit. See where there was common ground, or maybe kind of, and that's maybe the bridge to your second question. See if there was a kind of possibility for certain stakeholders to allow them to enter the low emission zone for a bit longer, but that would cost them then a kind of This is a kind of product we could offer against a certain pricing. So the whole thing with the low emission zone in Ghent was there was a certain threshold for sure, stepwise. And for sure there were certain cars based on their Euro norm that were allowed in. Everything under that group, you could kind of as a municipality see what you did, but there was one certain rule. The older the car, the more you could charge them as a municipality to enter the zone. That was a bit of the deal. And the low emission zone coach, he was kind of a bridge figure between us making up the rules and just your civilians.
Thank you, Bart. Just a second. I'm going to switch to Latvian to sort of paraphrase what you've said. Kolēģi, drošības pēc vismaz pusi no mums joprojām ir sarunā, 54 cilvēki. Es saprotu, ka visiem ir beidzies darba laiks, vismaz tiem no jums, kam jāiet tālāk citām sapulcēm, bērnu skolām vai treniņi. Paldies, ka jums bijāt ar mums. Paldies par jūsu komentāriem, tā skaitā slaido, tā skaitā jautājumu atbilžu sesijā. Mēs ņemsim šīs atziņas, vērtējumus, rekomendācijas vērā. Mēs ceram, ka šīs prezentācijas jums bija vērtīgas. daļu no tām mēs nevien ņemsim vērā, bet arī ar jums apspriedīsim 4. decembrī, kā minējām iepriekš, tiekamies ar daļu no jums 4. decembrī jau klātienē kopredz pasākumā, un atziņas, kas izskanēs šodien, pasākuma sākumā, pasākuma vidū un beigās izskanēs 4. oktobrī. Mēs mēģinām soli pa solim ar katru mūsu tikšanos kļūt atapīgāk, gudrāki un piezemētāki, lai arī mūsu saruna būtu konstruktīvāka un maksimāli racionāla. Tā kā vēlreiz paldies par jūsu laiku, uzmanību un jautājumiem. Tiekamies ar jums vismaz daļu no jums 4. decembrī. Tiem, kas var uzkavēties, mēs vēl minūtes 5-7, teiksim, pasparingosim ar Ģentes pilsētu, tā kā droši arī šeit rakstat jautājumus, ceļat rokas, lai mēs varētu būt pēc iespējas pragmatiskāk un piezemētāk. Visiem pāriem, kam jādodās, paldies par jūsu laiku, uzmanību un ieguldījumu, ļoti to novērtējam, tiekamies decembrī. Ja ne, tie, kas var paliekās vēl minūtes 5-7 ar Arnu Bertu no Ģentes. Sorry, Bern, coming back to you regarding the two questions. So to paraphrase, I think that the coach approach is very good to start out with understanding the situation, the feel of the situation, again, almost an acupuncture of where the pain points are for many various groups. Again, from the presentation, we saw that a specific route was created for perhaps communities which are impoverished, for elderly people, disabled communities, and people who joined the city of Ghent recently. So make sure that these no one is left behind. That's number one. And second of all, standing on those shoulders, thinking about the low emission zone as a market, almost, so to say. It's a give and take for different social groups, and each one of them may contribute towards benefits and perhaps some limitations. I think this is very practical and also almost a Flemish rationality speaking there, which I think is very much appreciated. Just to hang on here for a second, in terms of the calendar, how long was the consultation and public involvement process? I think it was about a year and a half, or perhaps even 2 years before the low emission was actually deployed in real time. Perhaps you can delve on that a little bit.
That's true. Regarding the calendar and so preparations took maybe 3 years. Gradually increasing in intensity, of course. The most important year was just a year before the low emissions zone started in 2020. And it was a lot of hard work. Depending on the way you organize a low emission zone, it's more work. We spend a lot of money on IT, front office for people to be able to see and to buy maybe a certain permit. Also to online to be able to regulate if they for certain circumstances were able to get a discount or even an exemption from the rules. But also behind the scenes, to be able to monitor, to be able to fine. We had a camera network. All of this took a lot of time to prepare and a lot of money. Money-wise, after 1 year or 1 year and a half, we had a break even of our investments. Of course, this is not a business model, but money is scarce. And it's important, of course. It's a kind of the polluter pays principle, in a way. But yeah, it took about 3 years to get preparations done. If that's your question, of course, because when you first mentioned calendar, I was thinking about the roadmap in a long term. There wasn't any public consultation regarding the roadmap. Let me be clear. This was very, very much an overhead thing. This was very much a kind of best solution thing. This is the roadmap. These are the limits in 2020. These are the limits in 2025. Then we will try to speed up a little bit. 27, 28, 30. But very importantly, every step you take in this roadmap, it needs validation from the council, from the local municipality. This thing, it's not because you start a low emission zone that that it's sure you're going to keep it for 10 or 15 years. That's not the case.
Thank you, Arne. Two last questions because we have to round up. Again, most people are finishing their working day.
Yeah, of course.
2 questions. One question would be, now that you've successfully managing the low emission zone, perhaps one thing that you've done differently in terms of the public involvement, if you could start from scratch. That's question number 1. Number 2, if you would now expand the geography of low emission zone, right? What would you do in terms of the social groups that should be addressed as first and foremost?
Difficult question. I will try to answer both questions at the same time. The main thing with the low emission zone is this is an instrument to nudge people into taking action. The action can be, I'm gonna sell my car. It's costing me a lot of money anyways. I'm gonna try public transport, etc., etc. Or if you have more means, okay, you take your company car. Or you have even more means, okay, I'll just buy a new car. It's a fact, not everybody can answer this call to action in the same way, and that's why it's there's an inequality here for certain people. Some people will say, fine, what do I care? Easy, I have a new car every 5 years. Other people will say, I barely use it and I like my car. Why are you forcing me to buy a new car? And this is the thing. What works is, does it really work? So you have to make sure people understand the benefits, the health benefits. You really have to monitor this thing. You really have to measure the amount of benefits in air quality. Many impoverished people or poor people don't have a car. For them, it's a win-win-win. But even they are not really convinced of the low emission zone. So this is also very important. And this is the main drawback of the low emission zone. You take 2 to 3 years of a kind of advance into greenification of the cars, of the vehicles. For sure, if you don't have a low emission zone, by time new cars will drive around in Riga. What a low emission zone does is, okay, it's not going quick enough. So we nudge people into taking action now, and then you kind of speed up this process of greenification of your fleet by 2 to 3 years. And then you have to make sure, is it really worth it? Is it worth it? Does this measure, do we need immediate action because of the air quality? Because of, and we know air quality is bad. We know it's bad, of course, but this is the main thing. It's really hard to pinpoint the benefits for air quality on one measure only, on the low emission zone only. This is just because it gets diluted. But we know in certain streets, small streets, old cars, it's poisonous. But this is it's a hard message to convey. So that's why I have to be honest with you. It has always been a difficult story. It has always been a difficult story. Our low emission zone is quite successful, but even still, not everybody is convinced it's necessary, it was necessary, and it's necessary in the future.
Great. I think that this is fantastic roundup, and also a critical one. So you have your own critical perspective on that. Similar as not everyone loves Eiffel Tower. Some people think that was an excessive toy to have for Paris. And some people love it and obviously think of it as an icon. Thank you so much. We're rounding up our conversation here. Thank you, Arne. Again, thanks for cooperation with Mark here and Helena. So thanks for having us. I think we can continue this conversation into the future since we're just starting with low emission zone.
Please do.
So we'd be happy to have a more in-depth sort of journey.
Let's be in touch. All right.
Here.
Okay,
again,
thank you, visitors. Thank you very much.
And we speak soon. Paldies. So I'm going to speak in Latvian now. Paldies, kolēģi. Pulkstens ir 27 pāri 5. Paldies visiem, kas izturēja mūs līdz pašām beigām. Es ceru, ka vismaz vairums no jums dzirdēja vērtīgas lietas arī pēdējās 20 minūtēs. kas mums bija no Ģentes, kā arī komentāri no Oslo un Polijas pieredzes. Paldies jums visiem par laiku, uzmanību, ieguldījumiem, tā skaitā par komentāriem, kas tika veikti mūsu Slido platformā. Vēlreiz apstiprinu, ka mēs ar jums tiekamies 4. decembrī, vismaz daļa no jums, institūcija kompetenta, ne visi mēs tiekamies 4. decembrī, bet vairums no mums tiekās institūcija kapacitātē mūsu kopienas pasākumā decembrī, kurā mēs šīs atziņas arī liksim galdā, diskutēsim un veidosim pēc iespējas piezemētāk, pragmātiskāk redzējumu, kā zemes emisiju zona, kā plānošanas instruments var sekmēt pievilcīgāk dzīvesvidi, tā skaitā gaisa piesārņojuma samazināšanos, tā skaitā tehnisko pusi, kas mums ir jāizdara, un arī rekomendācijas izskanēja no mūsu ārvalstu partneriem par monitoringu jautājumiem. Kā te mēs zināsim, ka mēs esam bijuši sekmīgi, veiksmīgi, un pats instruments ir atmaksājies no resursu ieguldījuma perspektīvas. Vēlreiz, lai jums lieliski atlikušā dienas daļa, tiekamies ar jums 4. decembrī, un priecīgs svētkus. Visiem veiksmīgi. Atā!
Paldies, Viestra!